And we are live. So, welcome to. If I can figure out how to place this thing. Give me a second. There we go. Welcome to Terminator 2 Thoughts Film Judgment Day. Now, this contains spoilers, including for earlier entries in this franchise. It's a long video, but there are time codes for the different sections in the description box. I've done other videos on the subject, links are in the description box, and since I've made other videos on this, I'm going to try not to restate what I said there in this video, except for stuff where I'm really, where I feel like it's worth saying again, or I have something to add. Like, now, and just FYI, this is going to have at least slightly longer of an intro before I get to the first section. Now, my own film critic rating for this movie is an 8 out of 10. I guess ultimately I can't really give it less than an 8 out of 10 personal rating either, but yeah, you'll see. Now, to reiterate, and it was going so well too. To reiterate, before I get into this, yes, I acknowledge this is a great movie, and for those worrying I'll go off on this film, I no longer do the Angry Rant videos. Seriously though, I'm going to try to make the most of this. I no longer want to do very negative videos. Now, I am going off the extended special edition, and actually, yeah, never mind. I'm going to get into that. Now, Roger Ebert said of Aliens, "I don't know how else to describe this. The movie made me feel bad. It filled me with feelings of unease and disquiet and anxiety. I walked outside and I didn't want to talk to anyone. I was drained. I'm not sure Aliens is what we mean by entertainment. Yet I have to be accurate about this movie. It is a superb example of filmmaking craft." I 100% agree. And that's the way I feel about the original Terminator movie as well. 2003's Monster, too. 3 of my all-time favorite movies. The second Terminator doesn't have anything similar to such an effect on me. And I realize it's probably not supposed to, but then why is it a Terminator movie? The second, this movie, it's well made, but it does not live up to its predecessor or its title. Unlike the first, this is not a movie about nightmarish killer robots that humanity will barely be able to defeat. We laugh at jokes about the T-800. We aren't scared of the T-1000. And even from right away, the future war is clearly winnable. Obviously, nukes are a bad thing, but the anti-nuke message in this movie is way too heavy-handed. The correct people point out in their commentary that the movie uses 2 kids playing with guns to communicate, "Oh, isn't human nature to destroy ourselves?" I've covered how stupid that idea is elsewhere. But as they go on to point out, I think it's the Terminator Genesis video. Anyway, the movie spends, and it says, if you don't want spoilers for that specific movie, the segment where I talk about the ideas in this, I don't spoil Genesis. But as they go on to point out, the movie spends 90% of its time saying, "Aren't guns cool?" And the other messages that the movie communicates are often just really not thought through by him. Yeah, I have things to add to that, but I'm almost 100% certain I wrote them elsewhere in my notes. Yeah, I talk about them in this video and elsewhere. Every single James Cameron directed movie has at least some wonky stuff about philosophy and or emotions. I'm not saying movies shouldn't have philosophy or emotions and or emotions. I'm saying, some movies choose one and not the other. Anyway, I'm saying Cameron is sometimes really bad at dealing with them. The first Terminator movie and the movie Aliens are not overpowered by that. I would argue that this movie is. I think James Cameron is an incredibly talented director, and clearly he helped shape the 80s and 90s, but ultimately, the only of his movies that I love without reservation are The Terminator and Aliens. And I do consider it a weakness of this movie that it has such a similar structure to the first. If it went nuts with the time travel, like Genesis, or Cameron had directed Salvation as the second Terminator movie, that would be something, but ultimately, the story structure difference between this and the first is that in this one they try to destroy Cyberdyne, which is an option brought up in the original script and the deleted scenes of the first one. You know, I'm saying it's not something that, like, suddenly Cameron had an idea he never had before. It's just that in the first one, basically, in the first one, you know, in some versions of the script, Sarah says, we're going to do this, and Kyle just goes along with it, and at the end of the, you know, by the end of the movie, she's simply too injured to, you know, to do it. And then, you know, originally, when he wrote those scripts, he wasn't going to make a second one, but, you know, this movie does say that she tried without the T-800's help, and they caught her. And the deleted scenes, she just ends up agreeing not to. You know, Kyle says it's tactically dangerous, it's not my mission, so we're not going to do it. You know, and I mean, basically, as far as I can tell, James Cameron genuinely felt like, I don't have the money. When he made the first Terminator, I don't have the money to blow up a huge building, I have, you know, all this stuff. So he wrote it out. Yeah, basically when he made this movie, he made, in some ways, the same movie, just he did stuff that he wanted to do the first time around. The T-1000 concept, he also had thought of when he made the first one, and he didn't do it because he didn't feel like the effects were, you know, they couldn't make it convincing. And even the concept of both a liquid, you know, liquid metal Terminator and a T-800 being sent through time in the same movie, that was also an idea he had for the first movie, and again, cut for budgetary reasons. So this was just him doing stuff that he wanted to do the first time, and it would be one thing if he had gathered the actors and directed extra scenes and then had the movie re-released. But making an entire movie and then changing so many things, I don't think you should call a movie Terminator when there's so little. The T-1000 is not a scary Terminator, and the T-800 is not scary in this movie. Just, I guess I don't know if I'm really recommending this, but what I'm saying is, if you watch the first two movies, if you watch the first movie and then, like, right after or the next day or something, you watch the second movie, it's not impossible to love both. But I'm saying that you can't possibly claim that it's clearly James Cameron was at a different point in, you know, he wanted to do different things. I mean, the first movie could easily have focused much more on the idea of the nuclear holocaust, but instead it focuses almost entirely on the machines. Kyle has the two flashbacks to his war, him fighting in the war against the machines, and he tells Sarah a lot. And what he talks about is Cyberdyne, Terminators, and hunter-killers. He barely talks about the nuclear war. And it's not as though it's there. It's just not focused on. He says, in a few years, all of this will be gone. That's, that obviously referring to the nuclear blasts. The Terminators themselves, they don't care about destroying buildings and such. They want to wipe out humanity. Destroying buildings isn't necessarily that effective of a way to do that. Anyway, I really wish this didn't have any connection to the first. That he just made a movie and we'd be like, hey, it's in a lot of ways a lot like that other. Aliens and Avatar has a ton in common. They have a ton in common with each other, but they're clearly not set in the same universe. but look at the way look at the Marines and I realized that, I can't believe I'm blanking on her name, Ripley. I realized that actor plays that kind of character in more than, outside of playing Ripley and outside and Avatar. I realize those are not the only movies where she plays that kind of character, but clearly he wanted her to do a very similar thing. She argues with the Marines. She doesn't think that just going, she's concerned about how they're dealing with the situation. And other than that, they're completely different movies. So it's not as though he's incapable. You can't tell me that when you see the giant mech suits in Avatar that it doesn't at all make you think of the power loader from Aliens. So I wish it was just a different, just change the names a little bit and just you can even cast the same people. Just don't. I think I should just move on with the notes, not about the movie. I'm never going to move on about the movie. So he wanted to do different things, and so at that point, should you really be working within the same franchise if you want to do such different things anyway? Now, the story structure being so similar with the first and second movie. I know there are other movies that do this, such as Home Alone 2. Copy what you did in the first one, and just, because it worked that time. Ghostbusters 2. But James Cameron made Aliens after he made the first Terminator movie, so clearly he was capable of making a sequel to a great movie that is very different from the first movie. It's not like he went and made what became the third Alien movie instead. That one is much more similar to the first Alien than Aliens is. Alien and Aliens are hugely different from each other. They have very little in common. They have little more in common than just Ellen Ripley and the Xenomorph and various permutations, Facehugger, Chestburster, and Drone. So it's, I don't, and movies he made after the, True Lies is hugely different from these movies. That's another movie where Arnold Schwarzenegger is a stone cold badass, and there are comedic moments with him. So just. Anyway. That takes us to the first section. Notes taken while watching. Now, I'm going off the extended special edition, which is 156 minutes with end credits, 152 without end credits, referred to as the Ultimate Cut on IMDb. I recently got that on Blu-ray, and what you may have heard is true. It actually puts the original ending back into the film, so the cheese of it can really jump out at you in the 3D. It's when I bought it, it has both the 3D Blu-ray and the regular Blu-ray, and I don't have a Blu-ray television. That's 3D television. Obviously, I do have a television which is compatible with Blu-ray, or I would not be buying Blu-ray movies. But they were smart enough to realize we're going to have to sell both copies within the same product because there are not enough people who have 3D televisions. But Cameron, he's sticking to that one, I guess. I also recently bought a new DVD of the first Terminator with a ton of brand new special features, and that one didn't add the deleted scenes back on. And you wouldn't have to put all of them back in if you didn't want to, but just I would really like to be able to at least once watch the first Terminator movie with the deleted scenes added back in, because when you just watch the deleted scenes separately, I mean, a lot of them you can place, you know, but then there are some, like, apparently, you know, not apparently, originally, the movie would keep cutting to the police. We'd actually see the two, you know, Vukovic and Traxler. We'd actually see them, like, arriving in a place and be like, ah, they already left. We have to, well, it's like, it's a very different thing to just watch brief success, you know, all of those in brief succession, as opposed to watching the movie with them added in those places. You know, you can't just conjure up in your mind the exact way it feels to watch those scenes and then the deleted scenes, you know. So, but here we are, the original ending from this movie. I don't think I'd ever seen it on a DVD before. I don't think I've seen it anywhere other than online. So they actually went, they got it, they optimized it for Blu-ray, for 3D Blu-ray. Yeah, but I'm going to talk more about that in later, because there's also some commentary on it, and he actually talks about that he still thinks it was a good ending, and just, yeah. And documentary, I think, also mentioned. Anyway, here is where the stuff that I noted specifically while watching starts. I do appreciate that where the first one opens with, you know, setting the stakes. You see this brief glimpse of the future war. Again, I love that. I prefer that. Anyway, this one opens with showing us what was lost, all the death caused by the nukes and the war. Before we see the desolate future, we see, you know, cars on the road, street, road, whatever, driving, and we see children playing. Excuse me, and then we see that playground, excuse me, after a nuke has gone off. I do think that's a very good kind of, it has a different effect than the first movie, and I do think, yeah, I think it's one of the changes where it's not necessarily better, but it's a good alternative. I don't think this movie needed to open. They could have. It would be very easy to cut out the shots of cars driving and children playing. You could open on the desolate playground post-nuke, but it wouldn't have the same effect. And then you have the, but yeah, you know, the stuff where this, it's one of the things that are different in this movie than how it was in the first. And it's, sorry, that work. That's what I'm getting at. It's one of the things that do generally work. And I'm just briefly gonna, you know, the cracked commentary, which I definitely recommend. You know, if you have a theatrical, you know, a DVD or Blu-ray with the theatrical cut of the movie, and you just, you know, it's free, you know, like a lot of it. I don't know if all of Cracked is free, but I don't think I've found anything that you had to pay for. But, and it's really, really funny. But yeah, they point out, we keep seeing this one playground. I guess it was like a tactical target or something. You know, it is a little silly that, you know, obviously it's for effect. It's, you know, yeah, the movie literally shows us children being wiped out by a nuke. You know, because that was necessary. You know, there may be limits to how manipulative you should get. Anyway, and then again, at other times the movie is a comedy. Yeah, I don't think they gel. I think the jokes in the first one fit within what's good. That's another thing. You know, like John Connor, he finds out, wow, the foster parents that I've spent years living with are dead, and, you know, my mother was, you know, was almost murdered, and she, you know, I thought she gave me a hug, but no, she's just checking to see if I was shot, and she yells at me for freeing her, and then he's like, you know, T-800, you're a real dork. Just, yeah. Was it mentioned in a review maybe or something? I think somewhere I saw someone say, you know, it's jokes for the Bart Simpson generation or something like that John Connor makes. Anyway, disregarding the fact that spoilers and other marketing gave away that Arnold was playing a good guy, I do think this does a good job of hiding that the T-1000 is a Terminator. Up until when he and Arnold fight, when they start shooting at each other in the mall, you know, let's go through. We don't see the T-1000 arrive. In the first one, there is a very clear distinction. Arnold shows no pain from the time travel. Kyle Reese very clearly does, and I do mean beyond the fact that he arrives midair. And I still, huge props to that stunt guy. I really hope that he feels it was worth it, because that was painful. But yeah, you know, he lands, it's like, but then he gets up. He is in agony. You know, this is, yeah, and we don't see Arnold like land or whatever, but we do see Arnold right after he's arrived in the first one, and he clearly shows absolutely no pain. And later, you know, Kyle later, you know, tells Sarah also, she asks, what's it like traveling time? And he's like, pain, bright light, you know, so yeah, and that's what it looks like when, you know. Anyway, setting up from right away, there's something different about Arnold. Obviously, the T-1000 also showed no pain when arriving, and this would give it away if we saw it. We don't see whether or not he takes the clothes off the cop. We realize later that he only imitated it. Again, if we saw the cop still clothed when the T-1000 left, we would know he's not human. But because they, you know, we see him arrive naked, as they all do, and then, you know, he runs up, kills the cop. I'll talk more about that later. But then we actually have the, you know, when he leaves in the car, he's wearing a police uniform. We assume he took his clothes, you know, and yeah. Yeah, just briefly, the following is completely a nitpick, and maybe it does pop up in it has all the readings from when he scans. Why does the Terminator say your motorcycle? You know, I need your clothes, your boots, and your motorcycle. How could he possibly know that that's the guy who owns that motorcycle? Or did he? Actually, yeah. For all he knows, the guy doesn't even own a motorcycle. There were other vehicles out there, but yeah. I realize it is not a big deal. Shouldn't be a big deal. It's not a big deal. Just gonna give a blanket. The action is great in the whole film. I'm not gonna go over every single scene because I'd just be saying this is a great action scene. Just if you're watching this, the idea is you watch this video after having watched the movie itself, and you know, you don't have to have watched the same cut as I do, but I think there might be a few things that I say in this that don't make sense if you haven't read about the deleted scenes, and I'm almost certain they're in full detail. Excuse me. I still have issues with my back. I'm pretty sure they're in full detail on IMDb's alternate versions page, so you know. Silverman delivering exposition to the visiting doctors or whatever they are does a good job of reminding people of the important details from the first movie, and it's not that long of a monologue. I think, you know, we take it for granted today, but like in 1991, you know, yeah, people did have, you know, video, you know, you could buy or rent the movie, but I don't think you should have to for you know, I think today, I think it's more okay for, you know, I mean, if you have the spare time and you have like Netflix, you know, you can like binge watch the MCU, for example. So I don't think it's an issue that there are MCU movies where you need to have, you know, you need to know a bunch of stuff in order to follow. Like Infinity War, there's going to be a ton of stuff that's going to confuse the crap out of you if you haven't watched the movies leading up to it. But with this, back then, I don't think you should absolutely have to have, at least not have it like memorized. 7 years passed between the release of the two films. So yeah. I've mentioned this elsewhere, I think it was in the spoiler video I did on the movie Glass, but this is one of the many movies that very clearly has a deeply negative view of psychiatric hospitals. I fully acknowledge there are very bad, there are psychiatric hospitals that treat patients and their families, for that matter, like utter garbage. But movies like this lead to people who may need help from such institutions not seeking help because they're afraid they'll be treated that badly. I haven't seen very many movies that have positive depictions of psychiatric hospitals, and I do think movies that do have such would help encourage people to consider, contacting such. The T-1000 does come off as slightly weird when talking to the foster parents, but just imagine Kyle Reese trying to do the same. He wouldn't be able to come off completely normal either. And again, for those who don't realize, Kyle Reese is probably my favorite character in the entire franchise, so this is not from a dislike of him. Whoever was filming Sarah recalling the dream really knew when to use a good dramatic zoom. I like the detail that the Terminator causes car accidents when making the sudden turns, when he sees John on the bike in the canal. Hiding the gun in a box of roses is clever, and I really love that that's put into several of the Hitman games. That first shot from the Winchester does sound appropriately epic and huge. James Cameron really knows how to stage action scenes with multiple characters moving, with individual guns and methods of travel. I've seen action directors try to do that and just not be quite as adept at it. And, I say is rather than was and possibly still is, based on, and I realize it's 10 years old by now, but Avatar and I think he deserves at least some of the credit for Alita. Ultimately it was Rodriguez who directed, and James Cameron didn't personally edit them, but he did write the original script for it. So yeah. When the Terminator drives out onto the road to catch up to the T-1000 and John, he causes another car accident because of his sudden move out onto the street. But yeah, just to briefly, you have John, the T-1000, and the T-800 all approaching the same spot, the mall, because John is going there and the other two are following him there. And then the T-1000, arrives, and we see he at first he's looking for John, and then once he spots him, he heads directly for him, and John runs off. The T-1000 follows. The T-800 comes from the other side, and John's seeing him, I would imagine that Sarah gave him, a very accurate description of what the Terminator from the first movie looked like. Probably, both, especially with the skin, with the face still on, so that if he was ever faced with one, he would immediately recognize it. Maybe they even had someone draw it from her description, so he had a picture to look at or something. But certainly he has a reaction. He's like, okay, that guy's dangerous the moment that he sees the T-800. So he stops. The T-1000 gets them from, and then you also have the other, the Pepsi drinking guy who's like, you can't be back here. So then the T-1000 and T-800 start shooting at each other, and John he gets John into cover, And then once, T-800 shoots the T-1000, T-1000 goes down, then gets back up, and, John runs away. In part, he doesn't know yet for sure if the T-800 is there to protect him. He realizes that once the T-800 comes to rescue him during the truck and motorcycle chase. And then let's see. Yeah, so, John runs away. Part of it may also be that he's thinking the T-800 might lose this fight, and if so, I don't want to be near the T-1000 when he's winning, once he's won. And then the T-1000 chases, John directly, first on foot, then the truck. Then the T-800 gets back on a motorcycle and, drives to catch up to them, ends up, landing in the canal, picking up John, putting John on his own motorcycle, and then not long after, the T-1000, the truck crashes and that whole thing. So there are a lot, through a lot of this entire sequence, or these multiple scenes, we actually have three separate players moving independently of one another to the same place. But yeah, and again, for a while of it, you're not 100% certain if, at first, the T-1000 might be, a human being sent by the Resistance. You're told that there, two individuals were sent back in time. Someone that was there to kill John, and someone who was, and a protector. And you don't know for sure until you see the T-800, shoot the T-1000 in the hallway of the mall hall. I wonder if you can buy Pall Malls in the hall of the mall. And once the T-1000 falls, and then his shirt and stuff heals, and then he gets back up, you're absolutely certain that, who's the protector and who's the killer. But it does a really good job of just, Cameron, he has a good sense of how frequently to cut to someone that, the T-800 spends a lot of time catching up. The T-1000 keeps getting to John before the T-800 does, and so we cut back to the T-800 approaching. Imagine if you didn't have the shots of him approaching, then it would feel like, well, where did he come from? When in reality, the fact that we don't see him move doesn't mean that he's not moving. And because there are just enough shots, and they're just long enough, of the T-800 moving towards them, once we see him arrive, we're not like, I haven't seen him for a couple of minutes now. I don't think he was moving at all while the camera wasn't on him. We're like, oh yeah, he caught up to them. He got there. Now, the T-1000 driving the truck fast and using it to effectively push away these, wrecked cars in its path in the canal is a good extension of the single-mindedness of a machine. If something is in his way, he will simply push it out of his way. And just under 42 minutes in, we're told that the T-1000 is liquid metal, and not long after, we get more details on what it can form. I know the T-1000 is a stone-cold murderer, but I know quite a few people who would stab that guy through the mouth just for drinking milk straight out of the carton and yelling expletives at a dog that isn't misbehaving in the slightest. But, yeah. Xander Berkeley, I want to say, he's always fun as this kind of a-hole character. I like that we see the broomstick that Sarah clearly broke the end off, having been broken before we see her attack Doug. It's even Doug that finds the, and then she gets rid of the broken off piece, instead grabs the nightstick that he had. It's a good, clearly she has a plan, and she knows, she's not just randomly getting weapons, she's upgrading, if you will. It wouldn't have made any sense for her to grab the entire broom. And, breaking off that chunk of, she's fit. I believe that she could do that. And let's see. But yeah, just We briefly see, again, James Cameron, he really has a sense for these things. You don't have to have that bit. You know, you could cut it if you wanted to. But the fact that he sees that door's not supposed to be open, and that door's not supposed to be closed. Anyway, so he's like, okay, I'm just gonna check it out, and he opens and he sees the someone broke the top off of the broomstick itself, and like moments later she runs up and hits him several times with it. That's because again, you could just have, actually, is that one of the scenes that are cut in the theatrical? I forget. I don't remember all of the cuts that are made. Is there a slight lag? I guess there might be a slight lag. Maybe. Anyway, there are many separate elements in the escape from the hospital. Cameron, again, you don't lose track of where characters are, and when a character, like when the T-1000 disappears, when the cops come back, and she's like, "They're your friends now," and then we see him as the floor, we're not like, how did that happen? We're just, oh, right, he snuck away from there, and then he hit, it's a very logical place to hide. The floor right in front of the vending machines. It probably won't be long before someone working at the hospital walks up to one of the vending machines and grabs something. And he'll, Almost everything I have to say about the scene at Dyson's house I've put elsewhere in the notes. But I will just, Sarah having to force herself to hate Dyson, to kill him, is psychologically realistic. It often takes a lot of vicious propaganda to convince soldiers to kill their enemies. Crimes of passion are often because the person hurting or even killing the other person hates them, feels passionately about them. Their self-preservation instinct is triggered or the like. Meanwhile, doesn't it go against the whole "it's in your nature to destroy yourselves" message of the film? Now, so once they get to Cyberdyne, a straw man might say, why didn't they just bring the guard further into Cyberdyne instead of leaving him tied up in the bathroom where he's found? They're going to blow it up. They don't want him to die. He's just doing his job. So they don't want to bring him to the place they're going to blow up. And it's also possible he would make himself difficult to transport in order to protect the place. Now, when the T-1000 returns to the movie, and as the good guys are smashing Cyberdyne, there's 45 minutes left, at least according, before if you're counting the end credits. And again, at least this version of the film. Now, James Cameron admits on the commentary track that putting 0.0 human casualties is silly. He just thought it was like, it's a nice touch. It works as this sort of, he calculates everything. So yeah. John goes, she's in the clean room, there's no way out of there. And the Terminator's like, oh yeah. I think I once heard someone say that the SWAT team should just run up to Dyson and grab the thing he's holding before he drops it onto the detonator. But if they tried to do that, he might drop it or just intentionally press the detonator if they do, before they get away. I acknowledge that several cars crash, blow up, or the like in the climax of the first Terminator movie, but that was the first time James Cameron did that in this franchise. With the climax of this movie, he overuses that element, considering that it's also in the first. I guess if you only watch even if you only watch this movie, there's just too much vehicle crashing in the climax of this movie. It gets repetitive. And I don't usually say that about it. I don't think that's true of very much of James Cameron's action. Again, including of the movies that are not quite my favorite of his. I think the first one pushes it as far as it should go in, like, there are a lot of times, I especially noticed it, I just watched it yesterday to be best at being able to compare. The maneuver of, like, this is the good guy's car, and this is like, that'll work. this is whatever vehicle the evil Terminator in the movie's using. In these movies, there's a lot of like, okay, we're gonna drive right next to each other, and I'm gonna like, just push you into the And I think the first movie does it as many times as it should. Or they'll very suddenly, hit the brakes, and the Terminator vehicle will crash into the back of it. And yeah, I mean, the climax of this movie really feels like this is what he wanted to do in the first one. And it's just, yeah. I get people who would feel that the first movie's climax should be bigger. And I think if he had the budget for it, it probably would have been. But one of the things I love about the first movie is that it is in part a horror movie. And I think a lot of horror movies do well with climaxes that are not huge. And I mean, I could give examples, but I'd be spoiling those movies, so I'm not going to. But I do think, just for people who might not have watched those movies, but I do think that this one pushes it too far, and I think the first one does a really great job, and it's also part of it. There's a very clear similarity. In this movie, we already have the T-1000 being in a truck that blows up. That happens very early in the film, and then he walks out after the explosion, and he's fine. Where in the first movie, a truck blowing up around the Terminator was, that took off all of his flesh and skin, and doing a huge, it's an incredible moment. It's an unforgettable moment in the first one, and then this, first you have the truck exploding early in the film, and then later you have it emerging from the, what's it called, liquid nitrogen. Then it, give me a second. And then, Arnie shoots it, and it reforms after, so it's still coming at them. So it has that element of, which is one of the driving forces of the first movie. And give me a second. Back. So where was I going with that? There's let's see. Right. In the first one, in the first movie, when that silver metal skeleton rises, it is a horrifying. And again, just watch this. Listen to the music. Listen to the music playing near the end of the first movie when the silver metal skeleton rises from the burning wreckage. When the torso attacks Sarah again, the movie does a great job. When we realize that the torso is intact, we just think that it's too destroyed to keep going. It's also like. Part of it is that for the entire first movie, we keep thinking of the T-800 we keep comparing it to a human being because that's what it looks like. It sounds like, it moves like, or maybe not, somewhat moves like. What I'm saying is it has legs rather than wheels, or wings or something. So every time something happens to it that would, eliminate a human being, but it doesn't eliminate it, it has an effect on us. It's shocking. And that's just not, in my opinion, that's not the effect of the T-1000 in this. But just briefly, you see he's stabbed by one of the three punks at the start, doesn't react. He's shot several times in the club with a shotgun, and eventually he falls over, but he gets right back up afterwards. You know, there's an explosion right by him. He just jumps right on and, you know, reaches in to try to grab Sarah and kill her, and then gets thrown off the car, windshield. Yeah, another one of the times where Kyle, where the good guys drive the car and then, like, smack part of the back end of the vehicle into, yeah. And let's see. I don't know if I'm gonna go over all of them, but I get, yeah, just so when the truck explodes around him, how many action movies end when a vehicle explodes and the bad guy is like in the vehicle that is exploding, or he's like close to the explosion, something like that, so you expect, and they say each other's name and they hug. You think that's where the movie's ending. You think this is it. This is as far as the T-800 can go. I know it's not called that in that movie, but I'm calling it T-800 instead of Terminator, because if I say Terminator, I might be referring to the T-1000. We think that's it. We see it get out of the cabin for a fraction of a second. We're like, it's going to keep going, but you see, no, it's clearly like it's not moving as though it has any. It's not moving as if it's going to keep attacking them. It falls over and you see some of the flesh burn away. A horrifying image. There's nothing like that in this one. What I'm saying is, I'm not scared when I see Sarah's flesh be burned off by the nuclear explosion. I know I understand why others might be, but it just doesn't. Ultimately, maybe it's tone. Maybe that's the biggest thing that keeps me from being scared by this movie. I can't be scared by a movie that at other times is so comedic. Maybe that's it. Because I do fully acknowledge that it is something that at least should be scary to look. I mean, I guess maybe also in part, I've never, I was very little when the Cold War ended, when the Soviet Union fell. So I've never really worried about about nukes. Whereas, a person that just keeps coming at me, no matter what is done to it, that, I've had a million nightmares like that. And the idea of like a skeleton of metal that keeps coming at you like that, just it's horrifying. Which is also, this one has several metal skeletons and none of them are scary, not even a little. I'm not saying they're not cool, but I'm saying they're not scary. But when it gets up, it's a horror movie moment. It's not really an action movie moment. And when the torso gets back up, we just saw it. The explosion, we see the torso, we see the arm land, and we see the torso. She crawls over and sees that Kyle, his eyes are open and he's lying completely still. He's dead. If his eyes were closed, it's possible he was just unconscious. But you don't lie that still with your eyes open if you're still alive, And again, you think the movie's over, he's dead, and then the torso moves. We know it's there, but we assume no human being would still be moving at this point. Its legs are gone. One of its arms are gone. It's not it's not going to keep attacking, but it does. And that's what we keep thinking, we keep comparing it to a human, and we keep finding it inhuman. We keep finding it, obviously not superior to human beings, but able to do things that no human being would be able to do. And yeah, just seeing the liquid metal. The liquid metal's cool, but it's not scary. It really, it should be. He goes around the movie stabbing people. You might see someone that you trust, and then it turns out that it's a machine that's imitated them. I find the voice, when in the first movie, when the Terminator imitates Sarah's mother's voice, I find that terrifying. So it's not the, yeah, the movie really, yeah. So, a lot of tension and suspense in the scene steel mill. I've said it before, but it bears repeating. I really love these two first movies. I don't remember about the third one. The climax is not just also true of Genesis. The climax is not just a chase or a fight. It's more than one chase involving several vehicles and several types of vehicles, and sometimes it's more than one fight. Really the first movie. Actually, I guess you could argue that it's maybe more than one fight. No, more than that. It's really more than one fight as well. Using different weapons, so it feels like just like going 12 rounds. Just really trying to defeat the evil Terminator. And it's not over in just a couple of minutes. 20 or 30 minutes are devoted to it. I think that's the best way to do an action movie climax. I do respect there are some movies that make compelling exceptions to that, but I think that's a good sort of, I guess goal is the word that I'm, yeah. Let's see. Wow, I did not take very many notes while watching. Yeah, the movie just doesn't. I don't think it works. I mean, maybe everybody else just is more okay with the tone stuff and isn't as bothered by the really stupid stuff. Or maybe they just didn't. Maybe the first movie doesn't mean to them what it means to me. And I mean, there was a time when I could really get into this movie, but I don't know, it didn't happen on this viewing, and I guess there's a chance it'll never happen again. And again, I'm not saying it's a poorly made movie, but I do think James Cameron is one of the directors who it would be good if there was someone to rein him in, someone to say, no, I'm sorry, but that's not a good idea. It's not going to play well. He needs some of that, but I guess there's some chance that the Avatar sequels will be amazing. They better be. We've waited for 10 years, and before that, it also took him forever to make the first one. Or rather, he waited a really long time because the technology needed to be there. But let me think. Yeah, it's not the movie is well made, but it has problems, and to me, those problems are simply too big to. There was a time when I could really get into it and enjoy it, even if I didn't enjoy it anywhere near as much as the first one. It's kind of like, I mean, The Matrix Reloaded, it's nowhere near the level of The Matrix, but it still has some really amazing stuff in it. Anyway, that brings us to the second segment. Notes taken before watching. Okay, let's see. Now, first, I have some stuff. I'm not going to read aloud all of this stuff, but yeah, this is some stuff that my ex-fiance wrote to me about the movie. Yeah, when the T-1000 calls for John and Sarah, didn't Sarah hear that? Why didn't she yell out to warn him? She couldn't have been unconscious or something, since she shows up moments later to shoot the Terminator version. And yeah, I would say Cameron sacrificed realism for cinematic effect, and you know, yeah, given the theatrical cut rather than the director's cut doesn't show the glitchy feet, it would have made a ton of sense to ADR in her yelling something that Sarah and John would know that the T-1000 wouldn't. You know, I guess there's some chance that off screen he explained the Wolfie Max thing. And she asked, do you think people in theaters, when the thumbs up moment happened, asked each other if that really just happened? If that was really how that character was going to end? And I responded, I know I personally, like you, the first time sat there in disbelief. That really just, he actually thought that was a good idea. Just, yeah. I also do briefly want to say, I'm not trying to ruin this movie for anybody else. If you love the movie, you know, if you love this movie, you hate the first movie, I'm not telling you that you're wrong, that you have to change your mind. I'm talking about how I feel about these movies and, you know, making my case, but I'm not saying you have to change your mind. You know, if you're watching this video, presumably you want to hear me making my case, but that's it. You're not under any obligation anyway. Now, and she points out the liquid they go into at the end, I'm guessing was supposed to be some sort of molten metal. I'm sorry, but that was way too thin. Cameron should have used something like syrup or something. Unpleasant, I know. The way they were splashing about, it's way too thin and is kind of obviously just water with lights under or in it to create the yellow-red lights to make it look fiery hot. Syrup would have been more viscous, made it look thicker and a little more difficult to move in. Though I'm not sure if the lights would have been effective, though they probably could have colored the syrup. Perhaps tests were done and they sacrificed the thickness of the liquid for the way it could be lit, which did look convincing, I thought. And I responded, you're absolutely right. I figured it was that they favored the color over the liquid viscosity and or the comfort of the actors who had to be in it. But yeah, it's again, it lingers on that. We see, like, does it last maybe 30 seconds of the T-1000 splashing about? Nobody thinks that what we're seeing is actually molten metal. Nobody thinks that it's that fluid. Like, it's just, sometimes I really don't understand. Sometimes he shows a really great sense of when to cut away from, you know, to make sure that it's that it's convincing. I think he, again, you know, the first Terminator and the movie Aliens, I do think a lot of this movie as well, but then there are a couple of times where he just holds on a shot and uses an effect that just isn't quite convincing. Yeah. And she asks, shouldn't there have been a I guess this is kind of just shouldn't there have been a snap back of the story, maybe even with a visual effect or something, as soon as Arnie's Terminator and that arm and the chip melted/died? Shouldn't it have gone back to the 80s and frumpy waitress Sarah? No kids, since now Cyberdyne will not have that arm. Will the company even exist? Skynet may never exist. No future like that happened. No Bean. Sent back. Doesn't T2 negate the first one to an extent? Excuse me, I wanted to briefly... Yeah, don't think. Yeah, I didn't write that back to her, but Cyberdyne did already exist. They just hadn't created the in a deleted scene of the first one. And yeah, according to the second one, the company found that they didn't just start when they found that. Anyway. And but yeah, you know, if one does accept, this is my response, if one does accept that the Connors, one, accomplished anything other than postpone their problems with killer robots, then they should indeed have undone everything that happened in these first two movies. And given how much growth we've seen in the Connors, that's kind of sad. The first one doesn't undo anything, rather the ending confirms that the future in the Terminator universe will be the horrifying one Kyle told Sarah about, but humanity will win, even if only barely. And only after a tremendous amount of loss, as we see, you know, Kyle's flashbacks illustrate how, you know, how deadly the war is. Just think about the first one. You see two resistance fighters die. You know, one of them, right next to him is, you know, she's like throwing that grenade under the big tank tread. Hunter killer, and then the flying hunter killer shoots that, you know, that guy driving the jeep, and it seems like Kyle is stuck in the jeep wreckage, you know. And then the second time, ultimately we don't see that many people shot, but clearly the Terminator is gunning people down. You know, he's killing, you know, there are a couple dozen people in that bunker. Excuse me. So, yeah, it's anyway. Yeah, I think it's a bad idea. I think James Cameron made a mistake by having this movie undo the stuff from. I mean, the first one. The first one shows that the time travel, you know, basically always happened, although I think there's an argument to be made that it's more that there are different permutations of the events, and originally, before the time travel, you know, the first time that there was a Sarah in 1984, she had a son, John, they named John Connor, with someone else. And, you know, let's say that there's still, you know, this was the Sarah and John where the Sarah, this version of Sarah trained John to be a warrior. Maybe maybe she fell in love with a former Marine or something, and he taught Sarah a lot of, you know, leadership, you know, all this military stuff, you know. And yeah, and let's say, you know, this is this guy still dies before the war, like Kyle says. And the events of the movie, that's the first time that Kyle is the father of John Connor. You know, but with this movie, well, you know, you're undoing everything in the. Yeah, the first two movies are completely undone if we accept that and that is, I mean, his original ending confirmed that there was no Judgment Day. So how does he reason that? How can those two different types of time travel, you know, exist in the same franchise? In the same series of events, even. You know, I mean, it's one thing if Star Trek. I forget. I don't remember for sure, but I can imagine there's more than one version of time travel. You know, But there's a huge difference between a time travel paradox and then changing the future and the present, but without that, then going and undoing you know, how can they destroy Cyberdyne if the Terminators never sent anyone back in time? And if not, excuse me. Yeah, just anyway. It's not something I have to explain further. You know what I'm talking about, because I'm not the first person talking about it. And right, and then Mike's fiance pointed out, who was doing the driving at the very end? They were weaving back and forth over the center line, and I responded, "Fine, John, just so you'll get off my back about it. For the next 10 minutes, you can drive." The crank people point out that everyone drives terribly in the movie. I think is what they, certainly the T1000 drives really, and maybe also the T800. I forget. Now, let's see. And let's see. Right, and she further says about we wrote back and forth a couple of times about the movie, and she says, the thumbs up. If it was meant to cheer John up, it failed because John's crying and keeps crying. Yeah, it really. I mean. So yeah, thumbs up. He's saying things will be okay. You will. I know this hurts. I understand why people cry now, but you're gonna be okay. In the long run, you're gonna be okay. But that didn't have to be through a thumbs up by a killer robot that 48 hours ago was ready to kill anyone that got in its way, supposedly, although this is the only time, let's see, the only time he actually almost kills anybody is give me a second, he almost kills the jock douchebag. Let's see, and yeah, and the in response to what I said about the second them destroying Cyberdyne and all this should completely, what's it called? Yeah, should undo the events of the first two movies. She says, which is also how I feel, more reason there never should have been a sequel, at least in the form it was. And she goes on to say, I think a film detailing their lives as she raised him, like the TV series was, would be fine. It wouldn't have messed up the first. The future's still gonna happen. Then skip the T2 storyline, just jump to the future and show that war and such, ending with John sending a de-aged beam back in time, then black screen, boom, circle back to the first, done, a trilogy. And let's see. Excuse me. Yeah, I write to it's almost like what I said about Terminator 2. I'd be fine with something that was called something else but had a lot of similarities. And she says, agree, if he really had this planned out, knew the basic idea of the film was basically a jumping off point for the story he really wanted to tell, why not just change the names to protect the integrity, not identity, and fan base of the film? It's not like the idea of sending someone back in time is new, or trying to stop a plague is new, or that there could be secret organizations lasting for centuries trying to cause an apocalypse. None of that is new, so just maybe note that it's inspired by something like what Cameron had to do with Terminator and Outer Limits. So change the names, still have the same types of characters as well as a bunch of new original ones, which it does, and go on with it. Probably still would have watched it if I heard about it. And then you get to, oh right, actually I think some of this is referring to the 12 Monkeys TV series. That's why the centuries and trying to cause an apocalypse and all that. Yeah, so anyway. And let's see. yeah, my ex-fiance points out, very impressive. Yeah, props to Hamilton for her acting, going from innocent and a little frumpy in Terminator, at least in the beginning, to practically a Terminator herself, total mama bear mode in Terminator 2. And I don't just mean the time she spent in the gym preparing, I mean her acting and character's attitude too. And to be fair, the frumpy may be as much due to the clothing style of the decade, and that she was supposed to be a waitress, and just an ordinary person, and that hair do or hair don't. And let's see. And I'd like to add, it did seem so natural for Sarah Again, reflecting the work Hamilton did preparing for the role, it doesn't seem like she's faking with the weapons and other skills. It really does seem like Hamilton took her role, playing a woman who learned her role was to be the mother of a future leader, to heart, and set out to make it so. And she points out, and the only thing I wish they'd gone into is how she linked into that underground of people who could teach her those skills. Because if I think of people who would have weapons and skills like that, they don't really take in outsiders. They're kind of a closed group, though I could maybe see them buying her tale of a military AI project going out of control. And yeah, I said, perhaps she got by using what she learned from being around Reese. Now, let's see. Yeah, and I'm just going to go ahead and say it. If there was going to be a sequel at all, I still don't think there should be even one, but if there should be at least one, I think I would prefer Terminator Genisys to be the second movie and the only sequel instead of this. It doesn't ruin... That movie really doesn't ruin very much of anything. It just has a bunch of references. They're not destroying these amazing things that the first one built up so well, which this one does. Again, my opinion. And everyone the T-1000 mimics does great T-1000 acting. Now, yeah, I already talked a little bit about that, but just briefly. The fact that this ends with them reaching the perfect place to defeat the T-1000, with first a jackknifing truck full of liquid nitrogen, then this plant full of molten lead, is simply too convenient. In the first one, I say it's just barely acceptable, because really, barely. It's acceptable because really all that it is a factory of some kind. I mean, the truck being destroyed is not jackknifing. It's because Kyle is careful to throw a lit pipe bomb into the exhaust pipe, which he was already using pipe bombs to try to destroy the Terminator. And yeah, then they go inside a factory because they have to go somewhere to get away, and it's fortunate for her that the metal press is not further away than it is when she, but one second. However, the ending, again, it's very much like a horror movie, and I don't think that it's a problem for the horror movie genre that in a lot of horror movies the ending can be a little convenient, even contrived, simply because if the characters that are threatened are not in limited circumstances, then the threat is not as great. Think of, yeah, I'm not gonna, again, I would be spoiling, but just, yeah, think of, there are very many horror movies where at the end, the person being threatened is maybe alone, maybe they're trapped in a fairly confined location. You know, think of how many horror movies would be, you know, where the ending wouldn't be scary if the characters being scared had access to a very effective gun, a fast and maneuverable vehicle, if the, let's see, yeah, just, you know, these kinds of things, so many of them would no longer be particularly scary. And yeah, that's, you have to do it that way a lot of the time, I think. The horror is a genre that needs to go there for that to be effective. And yeah, if you imagine the first Terminator, if her leg wasn't wounded, she would not have a hugely difficult time getting further away from the Terminator faster when it's just the torso. I mean, she would still. Anyway, let's hypothetically say that she was further away when the torso started moving. She would be able to get a more safe distance away by the time it was under the metal press. So, yeah, you know, it's a big, and it does make a lot of sense. There was an explosion very near her, sending metal flying in various directions. Of course, at least a small chunk of it is gonna hit her directly. Anyway, but yeah, you know, the first one, you know, after all it is a factory. But this, using something so similar and so much more convenient, is pushing it past the point of credibility. It is simply yeah, I already went into it, but it's just, I really think they should have just come up with a different, you know, something more different, something that wasn't, yeah. Now, after the events of the first movie, Sarah Connor would not automatically be arrested, since she didn't carry out any violence against any person, only the Terminator. But after the events of this one, she would definitely have to avoid law enforcement, or she would go to jail or back to Pescadero. There are people who survived the explosion of Cyberdyne who know that she was one of the people there. You know, she blew up a building and was involved in attack, not killing, but attacks on SWAT and cops and such. Now, ultimately, that is not really a plot hole for this movie, but it does make it really strange that in the TV show, John Connor goes to high school. I'm not spoiling the TV show, I'm just saying one of the things is that John Connor goes to high school when he too is identified as being present when Cyberdyne blew up. And I don't remember exactly how what the show says about that. I mean, I do realize there's a little bit of time travel going on there as well, without spoiling too much, but it's still, yeah, I mean, they wanted scenes where he was in high school, even if that didn't really make sense, yeah. And isn't Sarah also a bit too well adjusted to things? And I think I also wrote that. I'm doing a video on the show. I mentioned that in the video I did on the first one, but you may not have watched that one. But yeah, I think Sarah is too well adjusted in the show compared to the, you know, yeah, how she is in this. Which I do think that it's a very realistic way for, you know, considering the events of the first. Now, and you know, John goes, the cops are here. All of them, you know, how many? All of them, I think. You know, in Leon, I'm not going to give away who, but a character demand, you know, send everyone. What do you mean everyone? Everyone. And you know, there's a line in Ant-Man and the Wasp as well about how, you know, it's the cops, all of them. I just rewatched that movie, but there's so many lines, so many details. I couldn't find it in the IMDb quotes page, though I only skimmed it. and did a word search, really. But anyway, that was all I needed. That was what I meant to say. So, now, Lindsay Ellis, in her Nostalgia Chick video, An Enchanted Cinderella Ever After, talked about the movie. She said, whether something is considered feminist or not really depends on how it's read. Take Terminator 2, for example. On the one hand, you have a strong-willed, badass female protagonist who uses guns and does pull-ups, and has dimensions and all sorts of fun stuff. On the other hand, her primary motivation is her son, and he's the second coming, not her. Some people don't like that, and that is a thing. I think they do some interesting things with the relationship between John and Sarah in this movie, and I think there are some interesting aspects to John, the character in this movie. You know, when he's not being obnoxious and just, we're supposed to sympathize with him when he abuses, you know, when he realizes that he has a killer robot. He immediately said, you know, oh, these two guys, these good Samaritans came to help me when I shouted for help. They've done absolutely nothing to me, so I'm gonna verbally abuse them, and when they get upset about that, I'm going to sick a killer robot on them. And then he acts shocked when the killer robot almost kills one of them. But he was okay with it, being violent towards it. We're supposed to sympathize with this guy. We're supposed to hope that he makes it to the end of the movie. You know, rather than hoping he dies in 10 seconds or less. Anyway, I do think there are some interesting things, but I think that John is more interesting as the idea that Sarah has to be protected, because one day she will, her son will be the one. And I like her character better in the first one. I think they, in this movie, they have her say and do so many such stupid things that just, I don't think I can ever forgive when she talks about how, people who made the atom bomb can't imagine, feeling life growing inside them. It's just, again, in the first movie, the fact that she will give birth and raise the son, and that he will be, that's something that women don't get enough credit for. They're literally keeping the species alive. But the moment that you have the son, and then you have her, I feel like the movie so often makes her look dumb so that John can do the opposite, or say that she shouldn't say what she's saying. Yeah, anyway. But yeah, I totally get, whether it's, and you also have the thing that, the fact that she's a badass and uses guns, that's more of, I think Natalie Portman was the one who said, that's macho, not empowering. And, Natalie Portman quite appreciated in it's not a spoiler, in Thor 2, she gets to, via science, really, have an impact on the plot. And while it's a movie where a lot of really strong guys punch other strong guys, or attack them with weapons and such, she makes a huge difference without ever, well, she doesn't not hit anyone, but when she hits people, it doesn't hurt them badly or something. She slaps a couple of people, but and I think that's but I get that, that kind of thing would not really make sense for this kind of movie, which is again why I say it made the first one is so much better, because she does do a lot, but none of it is, almost none of it is violence. But I'm not gonna reiterate. I said that in the recent video I did on the first movie. So if you want to hear that, go there. Now, let's see. Yeah, just briefly. In my old vlog, where I talk about the movie, I say that, I'm going to be talking about the director's cut, not the theatrical, but if you haven't seen it, I'm not spoiling anything, because it barely changes anything. Most of the new stuff is good, although I'm not sure, It's overall the same movie. It's not recut, it's just other scenes added in. And a major example of a movie that's changed by the director's cut is Daredevil. Now, before I get into spoilers about that, just briefly, I'm not saying that Daredevil is a better movie than this on the whole, but what I'm talking about here is there's a bigger difference between the director's cut and the theatrical cut of that movie than the director's cut and the theatrical cut of this movie. Now, I am gonna hold my left index finger up while I'm spoiling the movie. So if you don't want the movie spoiled, press mute until you see me lower my index finger. So this means spoilers, this means no spoilers. Okay, so spoilers. I know a lot of people don't like that movie, but you have to admit, if you watch both versions, they are different from each other. In the theatrical cut, Matt Murdock ignores someone calling out for help to go sleep with Jennifer Garner. I'm not saying I blame him, but he is supposed to be a hero. In the director's cut, he goes off to help the other guy and ends up meeting up with this guy in front of his kid, who's scared of Daredevil rather than the other guy. He is confronted with whether or not he's really one of the bad guys. He beats up people who beat other people up, but the people he beats up already beat somebody else up, somebody innocent who couldn't defend themselves. Some people would say that's a distinction without a difference. It affects how he behaves at the very end. He does not kill the Kingpin because I'm not the bad guy. And there are certain lines you don't cross if you're not the bad guy. The director said of the movie that the director's, theatrical cut is a guy getting revenge for someone killing his girlfriend. The director's cut is a guy fighting to keep crime out of the neighborhood he grew up in. His neighborhood. The Coolio subplot makes it clear that the only way Matt can deal with crime is to take out the Kingpin. And yeah, so done spoilers. Okay, welcome back if you didn't listen through the spoilers. Anyway, I do really want to note, I don't think a movie needs to be made different by the director's cut. It's possible I did think that when I recorded the old vlog. It certainly kind of sounds like it when I'm listening to it again. But again, there are a lot of things that frustrate me about this movie. And, sometimes when I'm talking about something that frustrates me stating facts can come off as me thinking that those facts are negative, that there's some of what's wrong, which I don't think. Anyway, so I go on to in the vlog talk about the skeleton, the metal skeletons moving around fighting in the war. Now, what I want to add is, in at least one of the commentary tracks, James Cameron explains the idea is that both the human forces and Skynet are sending out every single thing they have to try to win here near the end of the war, which does help explain why they would send out skeletons without flesh. The flesh doesn't make them better fighters, it makes them better infiltrators. So Skynet is making these skeletons, then sending them out immediately, since it takes less time if you don't, if you just do it part way. Like, if you need a car that can drive and you don't care about if it's painted or not, yeah. Or maybe putting skin on them is done very late in the process and they had a bunch of skeletons in storage. However, this does not change what I go on to saying in the vlog about how the scene takes away from the sense that the war seems hopeless. I really don't think that you should show the future war in a way that doesn't make it seem unwinnable. I really think that's the way you should. The future war should be a horrible reality that is unavoidable. It should not be cool, and it should not be something where we get a sense that humanity can win. That's how I feel about it. Maybe if this movie had been the first, see again, if this movie was not a sequel to the first one, if this was the start of a new franchise, or it was just the only one in a different franchise or something, that would be fine. But you're following the first one, and then, like, did James Cameron forget the first one? Did he want to retcon a ton of things? Did he no longer like the first one? I don't know. Maybe he thought that it was too dark of a movie, and so he... I don't know. I don't... Yeah. Anyway. Let's see. Right, so... Yeah, in the vlog, saying, Kyle says, yeah. Sarah asks, can you destroy it? Kyle says, I don't know. With these weapons, I don't know. Meaning in the future, they have weapons that can destroy them. Now, what I want to add to that is, in the first movie, the good guys spend the entirety with access to very small, weapons that aren't that powerful or plentiful. They're never able to do more than temporarily slow down. Temporarily slow down the Terminator. Or possibly cause damage that he then has to repair before he pursues them again. At the very end, they're able to make pipe bombs, and those, along with the steel press, are able to destroy the Terminator. Here in the second movie, right from the start, they have access to at least some powerful weapons, and it just greatly diminishes how threatening the idea of the Terminator is. Here in the second movie, it genuinely feels like the only reason that things particularly go badly is that the T-1000 catches up to them before they're able to get away from Cyberdyne. If they had made it just a little bit further away, the T-1000 wouldn't have caught up with them, and they could have spent the rest of their lives protected by the T-800. In the first movie, it never feels like it will truly be over. It always feels like this is a never-ending nightmare. You will never even wake up from this nightmare. The only relief you get is when the steel press crushes the Terminator. Other than that, never-ending nightmare. If they hide, the Terminator will find them. If they run, the Terminator will catch them. And if they fight, the Terminator will kill them. All three of these things are exactly what happened in the movie. They try to hide in the Tiki Motel. The Terminator finds them by impersonating Sarah's mother. They run, there are several chases in the movie. Every single time, eventually the Terminator catches up to them. The only time he doesn't catch up to them is when they go into hiding, when instead he finds them before, And when any time that they stand and fight, he almost kills them, or ultimately, at the very end, does manage to kill Kyle Reese. It is again important to remember that the first movie was made during the Cold War, and the second movie at least came out after the ending of the Cold War, and certainly the line about the Russians are our friends now was written and shot after the end of the Cold War. During the Cold War, the idea of mutually assured destruction, of nuclear destruction of the entire world, did genuinely seem completely impossible to avoid. At least in the movie, there's the scene with the metal press. yeah, and just in general, again, I've never, in my entire life, I've never feared nuclear, being, my country being hit with nukes. Just in general, in just anyone firing nukes at any Western country because they know they won't get away with it, and the resources, it's a completely different. It looks completely different. First during the Cold War, some of it was lies, but the Soviets lied about their capabilities. However, even without that, I could still understand. I was always scared of the Terminator in the first movie, and when I first watched the movie, there were a lot of movies that should have scared me. Where I was a teenager when I first watched the movie, so there were a lot of movies that I had watched that should have scared me, and since then I've watched them again, and I was like, oh, now I get why it's scary. But yeah, the first Terminator and movies like The Thing and the original Halloween, the 1978, hunting you to, I don't know, maybe to other people it is. Maybe to other people the second one is much more relatable. I just can't. The moment that you say that a killer robot, starts to care about people and, care about human life within such a short space of time, it just, it feels like he castrates the original movie. He makes the Terminator funny. He makes the movie not be scary. Yeah, just anyway. But after the how amazing the first movie is, the second movie has such a lack of subtlety about his anti-nuclear weapons message. It's a good message, but it is terribly conveyed. It makes me think of Superman 4, and nothing in the world should ever remind me of Superman 4. And let's see. Right, and in the old vlog I talk about how we know that the first movie is a causality loop because the photo taken at the very end was the one that Kyle Reese had and which we see burning in the future. To the audience, it is confirmed when we see the picture taken. And there's some chance that Sarah realizes that the picture she pays $4 American for is the one that Kyle receives from John later on, even though she's never seen that picture. He described it, but that's it. It would make a lot of sense. She's a smart person. So. And and in the vlog I also talk about the comedy, the self-ironic humor and such. And let's see. Before I talk about comedy in this video, the following chunk is me talking about when I rewatched the first two movies to make notes from the second movie for the Thor Ragnarok review, back when I watched Ragnarok in theaters. I really felt like the first 10-15 minutes of this craps all over the amazing original movie. Now, in my old vlogs I talk about the future war stuff, so I'm not going to restate that here. I do talk about some of the comedy in a positive light. I don't really agree with my positive comments about the comedy in this movie. The stuff that's funny about the T-800, for example. Bad to the bone, really. In the first movie, the Terminator reaches its arm into someone else's body because it appeared to be the quickest way to kill that person. It didn't need to kill that person, but that person was a mild inconvenience to it, and so it killed it. The Terminator killed him without thinking twice about it. Actually think about that for a few seconds. Have you ever been punched in the stomach? Think about how that hurt. Now imagine someone jamming steel into your body in a way that kills you almost instantly. He must have punctured major organs for it to be that effective. It lands somewhere between one of the worst ways to die, since it's extremely painful, and one of the most merciful, since it goes so fast his brain barely had time to process that that's what was happening. The T-800 murders innocent people brutally without giving it a second thought. He very nearly dooms humanity, and that's his mission. And then the second movie plays Bad to the Bone as if it's his theme song. Some of the lyrics go, broke 1,000 hearts, what, by reaching down their throats, like Kyle says? I'm not gonna lie, I seriously consider simply not watching the rest of the movie, even though I felt I should, since Tessa Thompson put a lot of effort into doing justice to the icon that is Terminator 2 Sarah Connor. That is part of why I didn't stop. And if I didn't consider rewatching the movie to be research, which I try to be diligent about, I probably would have stopped, and there's some chance I would never have been able to talk myself into watching this movie ever again. I had completely forgotten the level of disrespect that it treats the first movie with. The first movie is in part horror, a horror movie, and would not be as amazing if not for that. As it is, if not for that. And none of the sequels even seem to try to go for horror. The first movie is one of the single most effective horror movies that I have ever watched, along with movies like John Carpenter's The Thing, his original Halloween movie, The Ring, the American remake. I imagine that the Japanese version is also amazing, but I haven't watched it. I know not everybody considers it a horror, but Rosemary's Baby, it's a psychological horror movie. It's not a thriller, it's not a psychological thriller. It is a horror movie, a psychological horror movie. And I don't like there being sequels, prequels, reboots, remakes to any of those movies either. If there had to be more than one movie in the Halloween franchise, then I can live with Halloween 2018 being, existing, but I would be okay with that one not existing. It's just, yeah. And it's not that I don't like sequels. I love the MCU, the majority of which is made up of sequels. And its interconnectedness is what I love about it. But just not for these franchises. The first movie, the end credits runs to the heartbeat of a killer robot. A powerful, almost overwhelming version of the main theme. This is right after the movie has crushed you. Not entirely unlike how Sarah crushes the robot itself. When you see the robot rise, the skeleton rise from the flames, when you see the torso move and try to kill Sarah again, at this point, Brad Fiedel, when he first watched the movie without music, he got super into the movie. And near the end of the movie, he didn't mean to say it out loud, but he couldn't help himself because he was so into the movie. He said, if that thing gets up again, I'm leaving. And that's what the movie does. That's another thing. When you watch the first Alien, I understand people who hate aliens because they love Alien so much. And the first movie, there's the first Alien movie is, Ridley Scott doesn't want you to leave that movie whistling and laughing and happy. He means to destroy you, and he succeeds. And that's what Terminator 1 does, and then, but Aliens is nowhere near as disrespectful. It's not really that disrespectful to the first movie. Ultimately, there's not that much in the movie that's that. He plays around with a couple of the elements that the first one introduces, but not really in a disrespectful way. But when by the end of the movie you are You have been broken by the movie. You're never going to be the same person again. Again, in my opinion, maybe not for everyone. And after that, the movie then plays the theme, which we now connect completely to. The movie has just given us relief from the Terminator itself, although we do see Sarah, there's a storm coming, I know. And she drives towards, she drives into the not unfamiliar future, but the horrifying future. She faces something so terrifying that the people who face it directly are left with PTSD. She's not trying to run from it. She's just facing it head on. And then the movie runs us over with a dump truck yet again. Again, I think it's brilliant. I love that the movie handles it exactly like that. And I think that's... But then... I'm not trying to criticize what the first movie does there. I'm trying to describe it, but I realize that it can sound like criticism. And it is, ultimately, it is... I understand people who don't understand why anybody would intentionally, watch a horror movie or play a horror game or the like, but that's it's one of my favorite pieces of music. It's my cell phone ringtone. I've heard it, I guess, 1,000, maybe 1,000 times, hundreds of times at least, and I'll never tire of it. It's also partly because I connect that music to having just watched the entire movie. But yeah, that's the end credits of the first one, and then the movie both opens and closes with versions of the main theme playing. Variations of the theme play at points in the movie itself, and this movie also opens and closes with the theme song, but in this one it also runs some of the credits run to part of "You Could Be Mine." I figure, well, maybe the just briefly, I realize this might sound a little weird. The reason that I know that that's part of what runs I've watched this movie with commentary on several times now, so I heard that "You Could Be Mine" was playing over the end credits before, not only just today, but I thought maybe the credits run for so long. They couldn't use only one piece of music. At which point I figured, well, they didn't have to go with pop music. They could have simply used different parts of the overall score for the movie. You don't have to keep running the theme. There are different pieces. There's one of the music that plays when Arnold says, "Trust me." You promised you wouldn't kill anyone. You swore you wouldn't kill anyone. Trust me. And then he walks off, and then a piece of music plays that is very similar to the main theme, but it's clearly not quite the same. They could have used that, but yeah. But looking very closely, it seems like the end credits are over in 4 minutes, at least in the version of the film I watched, for this video. So why just use the main theme for the entirety of that? It's just, I mean, it is that, let me think. I was gonna say, I'll be back in 30 seconds max. So, let me think. I was talking about that, let me think. Yeah, the theme music and I guess maybe I had said everything I wanted to about that, but so yeah, I'll move on, but let me just real quick. Let's see, the theme music. Yeah, I think that. Anyway, yeah, so in the vlog I'm going to talk about, if you had to make a sequel to Terminator, you had to be a little bit self-ironic over it. If we're going to spend another 2 hours with Terminator, we've got to have a few laughs. And what I want to add to that today is, otherwise the tension becomes so thick that you just can't sit through the entire movie. The first movie pushed it as far as it could possibly go without becoming unbearable. And again, some movie directors push it too far and it becomes unbearable. And if the second one maintained that level, it would be too much. Which is, again, just don't make a second movie. Just make, a similar movie. Right, and then, the vlog I talk about the thumbs up. And I say, hadn't the chip burnt by the time we see the thumbs up? And, to be fair, I guess his head being submerged doesn't mean that the chip itself had been burnt by then, since we see, special edition and such, we see them take out the chip, and, it is housed under, it might take a little while before that whole thing is burnt. Let's see, he might need to be submerged for longer before the chip is broken. And, in the, let's see, in the vlog I then go on to say that there's a, excuse me, just a second. Just to make absolute certain, check. There we go. So, I mentioned that the red-haired mullet kid, he's once the T-1000 shoves him out of the way, he's never referred to at all. I mean, it wouldn't have been impossible for the T-800 to go back and just check if he's still okay. I mean, he and John are friends. He trusts this kid enough to steal money right in front of him. He's certain that this kid isn't just going to give him over to the cops, which he very easily could have, because they don't watch each other all the time at the arcade. If the mullet could have gone over to a payphone, called the police, and said, "There's a kid here, I can prove he stole money." I get, most kids probably would be, I'm not gonna, no. I don't doubt that John could find someone who would be comfortable with that. However, he did. He found someone who's comfortable with that, and he's not even gonna check if he's still alive. I mean, he at least warns Todd and Janelle, even if he's too late. You know, there were theories that he was going to be in Genesis, since there was a young male actor who's, let me think, who's going to be in the movie in an undisclosed role, so some people guessed that it would be that kid. Oh, that's right. I was the one who said the way he teaches T-800 to talk is also maybe a little bit just pandering to Bart Simpson fans in the audience. Yeah. I'm not sure if I've heard someone else say it before, but anyway. And yeah, and in the vlog I mentioned that, if you think the Sons of Distant Fathers grew up screwed up, just wait to see what a robot is going to do to a kid. And today I'll add, a robot specifically made to kill at that. I don't mind that he's a protector, but don't tell me he's a father, no matter how much reprogramming. That is ridiculous. How can people take this movie seriously? This is not like a throwaway line. It's a major thematic element. At the start of the movie, the Terminator is willing to kill anyone, or at least he's willing to kill jock douchebag Good Samaritans. Not anybody else, apparently. And by the ending, he is supposedly a good surrogate father for a 10-year-old. You can't tell me with a straight face that you've never thought that that was silly. I don't buy it. Nobody can. You know what? Maybe a 10-year-old. Maybe a 10-year-old would buy that. But nobody else could actually believe that. And again, if this wasn't a Terminator movie, if it was just then maybe the T-800 isn't a killer robot. Maybe it is just, made to protect a specific target, but not just, be willing to kill just anybody. Anyway, let's see. And further in the vlog, about the, how apparently Dr. Silverman thinks that, I guess she's just catatonic. Realistically, realistically, shouldn't Silverman be trying to push her buttons to get her to snap back out of it so that she can answer their questions? How about he offers her that she can call John soon if she answers their questions? It's so blindingly obvious that it's baffling that it's not in the movie. If she did actually keep completely calm with him offering that, it would even further underline how determined she is to be sitting still despite what she's being told. So it would work with the movie and make it a better movie. It would make sense if originally John meant to cut to the mental hospital every few months, so the scenes being so different for her would make sense, and then later change the structure. But the structure is so similar to the first movie, so I doubt it. It would have been a completely different movie, or they would have had to be flashbacks or something, but it would be ridiculous. Yeah. Let's see. Right, and I criticized the sound of the T-1000's pistol, and again, in this video I'd add it's like the stereo, not my version of the 45 long slide in the first movie. Now, let's see. And oh, that's right. Yeah, I say in the video, it's cool when the T-800 fires the M16 directly into the T-1000. But it's also unsatisfying because the T-1000 should have done something. He's right there in front of him. Just cut into him or break suddenly throwing the T-800 off or something. And, you know, I had written for today to add, like Kyle Reese does the Terminator in the first movie. That's one of the times where Sarah would have definitely have died if he hadn't acted. But then, you know, as I realized earlier, that would just have been yet another one where there are already too many of those in the movie, and especially in the climax. But it is still like, yeah, it looks cool, but why doesn't the T-1000 do something to... That's the thing. I think a lot of this movie, the T-1000 just does not think... It doesn't behave in the most effective way. And it seems like it's just that the... Otherwise it wouldn't have worked out for the good guys, basically. Now, let's see... Yeah, and in the vlog I talk about, you know, people rationalizing the, you know, the T-1000 has skin, it just sheds it and we don't see it. It's just, yeah, like I already said, it's rationalizing. Now, to add today, I realized that the reason the time travel is described in the first movie as only working on something that has flesh and skin is to explain away what Silverman points out. Why not time travel with advanced weapons? You know, why not send... Yeah, I think that's... Yeah. You know, James Cameron could not have afforded the special effects for advanced weapons for the entire movie, in the first movie. But James, you made your bed, now a Terminator has to fight a surprisingly resilient half-naked man on it. Kyle Reese didn't build the fucking thing, but you did. That's exactly how you wrote it. And now you go completely go against it because you liked the concept you had. It just, the movie has so little, yeah, just, yeah, there's a term called kill your darlings, and in this he had a lot of darlings and they were incompatible with each other and they're running rampant. Now, yeah, and, you know, the nuclear explosion is extremely realistic, convincing. Maybe the closest the movie gets to being scary, and you can understand why someone having a vivid nightmare like that often would become desperate to stop it from being reality. Let's see. And that is it for my old vlog. And let's see. Yeah, and I rewatched my old spoiler video on Genesis, Terminator Genesis, the part where I talk about T2, and yeah, you know, yeah, if you're watching this video and the playlist for these is right next to, you know, if you click on, it's called Thoughts, you know, Thoughts Genesis or Thoughts on Genesis, something like that, possibly a different order. And it's 43.5 minutes into 50 minutes and 32 seconds in. And yeah, just to briefly, you know, put out, I talk about the idea that human beings don't have empathy and other concepts brought up by the line, if the Terminator can learn the value of human life, maybe we can too. The nonsense surrounding the speech that Sarah gives to Dyson about you boys and your war toys. Okay, and here we get to DVD and Blu-ray special features. And yeah, I'm probably going to read aloud a lot of this. So, this is called T2 Reprogramming the Terminator. It's from the Blu-ray. They give the movie a lot of praise, and let's see, and someone says the movie talks about cops, doctors, nurses, do they use their authority correctly? I think it might have been a good thing if Sarah had brought up that Doug was abusing her physically and sexually, and just, had some reason for why. I mean, this is a woman who stabs Silverman in the knee, who leaps over a table to try to kill him, but she's not even gonna raise her voice about Doug. I just don't. Again, I get that those are under duress and stress, but yeah. And let's see. Apparently James Cameron had ideas for other stuff, didn't really want to do it, but they paid him $6 million. And someone said, mixed message for the audience, cops are good, cops are bad. And and a psychologist doesn't listen to a patient, a cop. My main concern was how we were going to do the T-1000. And Schwarzenegger about the T-800 being a hero. My first thought was BS. And James Cameron writing on Hamilton, she said, I don't want to play the waitress I played in the first one, I want to be crazy. Then Hamilton got so in shape that Schwarzenegger felt up her muscles and said, you got so fit, and she said, it was all worth it for that one moment. And Sarah becomes like a Terminator, but she ultimately can't destroy another family to save her own. Robert Patrick created the T-1000 stare and movements. About the T-1000, they say there was a zen quality about him, and that would make him scary. And Patrick could actually catch up to the bike, and James Cameron went, okay, well, you just killed John Connor, and the world just ended, so we'll do another take. Sometimes James Cameron is a very, very funny guy. And can make the most out of a, negative, that was not how that was supposed to go, but he just makes a joke and they keep going. So, and James Cameron says the truck is a flat surface, so it's like a wall of steel, and that was what I wanted. When the T-1000 chases a canal, I think it was dangerous for them driving in front of the truck filming it. Miles Bennett Dyson is one of the few black guys in science fiction movies, and he doesn't die right away either, like most of them, is what the actor says. I'm sorry, I forget his name. Joe Morton, I want to say is his name. And later on, there's going to be a bit from another African American actor. So I haven't slept enough in a couple of days. And the stop breathing, I thought this was interesting. As Miles Bennett Dyson dies, is because his lung collapsed, which the actor based on his own car accident that he was in, where his lung collapsed. So yeah, it was difficult to replicate melting steel. Brad Fiedel worked 18-hour days, 7 days a week, and he would try to do score, but there would not be effects shots. So he had to call James Cameron and ask him what's happening and how does it feel. They thought the original cheesy ending would actually work. They didn't have a single backup planned. Everyone who read the script went along with that ending. There are cheesy moments left in the film itself, but it is baffling to me that anyone, much less someone as largely intuitive about what works in films and what doesn't as James Cameron, actually believed it would work. So they had to change the ending within a couple of days. The ending shot of the road is actually from right before the Cyberdyne reveal. That wasn't new footage shot or something. They just wrote a new voiceover and that's it. And just, it's unreal to me that they, yeah. Anyway, then there, also on the Blu-ray, there's something called The Making of Terminator 2, and it's a documentary from 1993. So, yeah, the reasons for casting Robert Patrick for the T-1000 Terminator. He's a contrast to Arnold Schwarzenegger. He looks somewhat similar to Kyle Reese, which makes you wonder if he's the Terminator or the Protector until you see for sure that he is the Terminator. He looks somewhat like a cat. James Cameron said the Terminator is a Panzer tank, and the T-1000 is a Porsche. Excuse me, they wanted someone who could be convincing as a human being, but also have the intensity that the Terminator needs. Arnold Schwarzenegger himself was never that likely to blend into a crowd, so this is closer to the original conception of the Terminator and what he will look like in the first movie. If James Cameron hadn't liked Schwarzenegger when he met him. And let's see, yeah, first deleted scene off the Blu-ray without commentary. T-1000 searches John's room after killing both of his offspring, runs his fingers across everything to scan it, and finds a box of stuff of John's mother. He doesn't find John's mother stuffed into a box, no. And the second deleted scene without commentary off the Blu-ray, the future coda, the cheesiness is unbearable. And the line, hope was given to me by the Terminator because if a machine can learn to value human life, then we can too. Again, I talk about human empathy in the Genesis Thoughts video, 43.5 minutes in to 45.5 minutes in. And if you're not watching this off the playlist is linked in the description box for this video, so you can very quickly get to it. But he made sure to keep that in the changed ending, the one in most versions of the film, because there was no way he was going to keep it from being stupid and cheesy, even if it couldn't be as stupid and cheesy as he would prefer. And before that, she says that John fights on the floor of the Senate using common sense and hope as weapons, which is impossible to take seriously today. And I mean, even back then, I know that it was a more naive time, because the Cold War had ended. There are reasons that people were more, but it's ridiculous. I seriously, I cannot believe that they actually thought. But I mean, it's been ages since I watched The Abyss, but wasn't that also a case where the ending that Cameron chose was something that people didn't really expect and they didn't end up liking it very much? I think maybe, yeah. Anyway, first lead scene with commentary on. Cameron talks about that the audience understood without this scene that the T-1000 could sample things by touching them. I read somewhere that he thought that some audience members thought that he had X-ray vision, and that's why he could see that the thing was hidden behind. But sampling things by touching them, well, yeah, but to imitate, but to get information as well. I mean, I guess that's part of the idea. But then why didn't he know that Janelle wouldn't be nice to John on the phone if he sampled her? Yeah, I don't know. Anyway, part of the reason the scene was originally filmed, originally the film explains how the T-1000 knew where Enrique and the others were, but in the finished film he doesn't go to Enrique, at least as far as we see. So it wasn't such a necessary scene anymore. And the second deleted scene. Stan Winston didn't think that the effects came out looking particularly good, and Linda Hamilton was fine with seeing the old age version of herself. She felt unnerved by the process of putting the makeup on and taking it back off. James Cameron feels that it's stronger, but he's glad that the movie works even without that scene. I mean, technically speaking, it is a stronger scene, it's just that it's strongly making the audience want to hurl. I mean, he recorded that, many years after. I mean, even if that was recorded for the first DVD, it would have been mid to late 90s, so years would have passed. And he still thought that it was a good scene. Okay. Right, and the trailers of the Blu-ray. The first one is for the 3D version, which I've never watched. Let's see. I can't. I should have proofread this. Okay, I'm just gonna read it. I don't want to own a 3D TV, and I didn't watch this in theaters when it was first converted. I distinctly remember this and Titanic and The Phantom Menace, and I was like, why? Why would I want to watch a movie that wasn't originally shot for 3D, that's been post-converted into 3D? And this is Cameron who didn't do Avatar until they had great cameras that would do the 3D justice. Just, yeah. They show a lot of clips of the Terminator being a good guy before saying that it's been reprogrammed. They have it end on, I swear I will not kill anyone, which is one of the biggest problems with this movie, so thank you for the warning. I do appreciate, there's this, back when Arnie ran for office, someone took his campaign, one of his campaign videos, and it was a perfectly decent campaign video, and they didn't change anything, but at the very, very end, they didn't change anything of the majority of the video, but at the very, very end, before there's like a logo or maybe it's his face or something, and it lingers on that for just a couple more seconds. I'm not sure if it also plays part of the Terminator theme, but for sure it plays the voice clip of I swear I will not kill anyone, which is just a hilarious, you're sitting there watching the campaigns like, do I want to vote for Arnold Schwarzenegger for office? I'm not entirely sure. You get to the end and it's like, I swear I won't kill anyone. You got me. That's sold. I'm with you now. As long as you won't kill anyone, I'll vote for you. Now, and the teaser of Arnold being built from the skeleton up is pretty cool, but the red eyes suggest that he's a bad guy. This movie would have been a lot better if he was. Now, let's see. Right, and this is the commentary track. According to the cover and menus, it says 23 people, but the track itself says 26, which is the same as the same as the special edition one. But this one is for the regular cut, so maybe those three people are not, they only talk in those parts, and it's clearly the same intro. So, yeah. Anyway, the 2 hours and 17 minutes, the regular version, the theatrical cut. The burning playground set was indeed the set they used for the nuclear explosion, and burning it was one of the last shots they did, since they had to make sure the nuke stuff had been gotten before they flamethrowered it. Now, and Hamilton wanted to be crazy in a mental hospital if she was going to play the character again. For the minigun, they talk about how supposedly the Terminator can figure out even the ricocheting to make absolutely sure that no cop gets hurt. I'm not expecting these movies to be realistic. I just want to point out that is absurd by any standard you hold it to. You cannot possibly predict how the cops are going to move. Maybe one of them has some kind of Rambo complex and runs towards him as he shoots. Let's see. And even though the Terminator couldn't have known that is what he was going to do, he would still be at fault because he's the one who pressed the trigger. I get that it's a fun scene, but you can't claim that he would be absolutely certain he wouldn't kill any cops. I think I may have talked about this elsewhere before, but just, again, this is a movie that's so obsessed with making guns look cool. Why not simply have why doesn't he, they could have him use a gas grenade launcher like the one the SWAT, some of the SWAT members use. Just a little later he could have shot that to get them, which would actually have made a lot more sense, because what he does he doesn't even hit any of them, right? Because If he hit one of them in the foot, that guy might immediately fall over, and a fraction of a second later, the T-800 is firing bullets into his head instead. So yeah, he didn't shoot anybody. So all he did was destroy their cars. You know, the let's see. Yeah, it's, and again, if you wanted to, you know, the minigun, let's see. Well, for one thing, it could have been, let me think. Yeah, actually, I'm not sure I have a good suggestion. Anyway, now when the T-800 is being shot as he walks towards, the SWAT, they couldn't get the robot to walk exactly like Schwarzenegger. So Schwarzenegger adjusted his walk so that it would be close to the robot, so they met in the middle, which I think is a very clever way to do it. That's how you should approach things like that. And that's, I mean, I'm not going to claim that Schwarzenegger has never done anything wrong, but he clearly does. I mean, him having to adjust how to, you know, that some people would not be able to accept that. They wouldn't, their ego would be too bruised. But he went for it, and it really worked. Before hearing that, I've always wondered how they made it look so convincing, but yeah, that's... Now, following is from the commentary track on the Blu-ray by James Cameron and co-author William Wisher, and it's the 217-minute version of the movie. Now, the horses on the merry-go-round are supposed to represent the 4 horses of the apocalypse, but they're not horses. It's a seahorse and then there's some others. So it's the seahorse and some others of the apocalypse. And yeah. And one part we see the Terminator POV, and then, you know, most of these are going to be James Cameron. And then James Cameron says, "We call this thermovision because we're clever like that." And he says, "The fact that we're so close to the Rodney King beating has a certain resonance to this movie, since the bad guy is a cop. Who was the enemy going to be? If we were going to make Terminator 2, obviously it could be just Sarah and John against another Terminator, but that didn't seem to move very far downfield. We considered for the liquid Terminator to look like Arnold, but we decided at some point that it was better if it didn't look like him." And William Wisher adds, "He should be an average-looking person because he's designed for infiltration." And Cameron says, "I love that we're able to bring back Silverman because he's such a pompous ass in the first movie, and he's even more of a pompous ass in this movie. And he's also great in the Monkey Island games, or at least The Curse of Monkey Island, which is the only one I've played. I got that game on like a discount or something, and yeah. You know, you can follow it fine if you haven't played the first 2, I would say. And yeah, while Robert is talking to John's foster parents, James says, "I love his performance. It's just a little weird, but he also seems like a regular cop. There's just a little bit of malevolence there." When Sarah put on an act to trick Silverman into letting her see, or at least contact John, I think the metaphor really works, that every parent thinks that the safety of their own child is the single most important thing in the world. As the T-800 approaches John before defending him, even though Arnold isn't the bad guy in this movie, the T-800 still looks threatening because he doesn't know anything else. The first time Edward Furlong drove the bike wave, the T-1000 was running, the T-1000 actually did catch up to him. I forgot that I'd mentioned that in another part. When the T-800 makes the jump from above the canal into the canal, there were wires to make it safer, and it was the first case of digital wire removal, which is now done thousands of times in a day. John calls his foster parents. Jim says this is some great paranoia. It's real invasion of the body snatchers stuff. I feel like leadership is something you're maybe born with. You see that in dog societies. Some dogs run the pack, others take orders, and John is someone who would give orders. You see that a little even early on in how he's clearly the one in charge when it comes to him and his red-haired friend. I love this moment when you think Sarah has really gone catatonic, but then you see that little move of her grabbing the paperclip, and you realize she's working it out. She's got a plan. I love this move because Sarah becomes the Terminator, and the Terminator character becomes like Sarah in a lot of ways. Sarah really does think that everyone around her are really ghosts. They're already dead. So if she has to kill someone, it's not a big deal. She is crazy and dangerous, but it's a high-functioning kind of crazy. Bill Wisher says, we came up with the drain cleaner as a weapon. Excuse me. And Cameron says, things that are blue should not be pumped into the human body. Even if the stakes of the fate of the world, I didn't want the image of John with a gun in his hand ever. I think of the T-1000 as T-800, East meeting West. Bill Wisher says soft versus hard. I guess, soft versus hard. When James Cameron again, when John throws the shard of T-1000 onto the street, the T-1000 samples him but can't replicate his thought process, and ultimately never does replicate him physically. I've seen people criticize or make fun of Enrique for pulling a gun on Sarah when she shows up. Think about it though. He hasn't seen her for years. Might she now be killing people? Especially people that know about her. And this is a world where there are Terminators that look exactly like human beings. He doesn't know about the T-1000, but, he might have thought that was possible for a Terminator. She might as well be a T-1000. And, now it is not, what happens is not that ultimately he just lowered his gun because there are more guns on him than her gun. She says in Spanish, and he says, pretty jumpy, Connor, and she responds, and you are always like a snake. No one but her would know to call him that. It's like how the T-1000 as Janelle showed too much concern for John. Unfortunately, if you do not know Spanish, and you don't have subtitles that translate the Spanish, which I only very recently did, you have no idea what she says to him, and thus doesn't know that what she says to him is something only someone who would know him well would think they would get away with saying. I have never... Today was the first time... Did I read it one of the times with the commentary tracks? Possibly. Only very recently did I know that that's what she said. The other times... she doesn't look that much like she doesn't give a grin like she just said something really snarky or something. She says it so straightforward, and some of the things she says in the movie are incredibly dumb. So, no, I think either, just have the T-800, have a quick POV shot from the T-800, where the what she said in Spanish is written, and then it says translate into English, and then it says in English because it's not even complicated. And you are always like a snake. It's not something that you're not. It's not like when you're translating, when you translate Shakespeare. I think Hamlet is when. No, wait, Romeo and Juliet, I think might be. There's a character who says, talking about dying, and the line goes, and the rest is silence. Now, does that mean that the rest of what he says is silence, because he's dying, or the rest, the rest is silence, death is pure silence? Those two are not the same thing. How do you translate that into another language? Because in English, you can do that. You can have both meanings. Excuse me. But in other languages, you may have to compromise and choose one of those. This is not that, Let's see. Now, James Cameron says, Sarah's decision to kill Dyson puts her son back at risk. which is the thing she couldn't imagine doing, but she can no longer live with the war being inevitable, even also means having to take a life. They wouldn't have been found by the T-1000 if they had just stayed in hiding, if she hadn't gone after Dyson. She has become the Terminator, she's ironing the first movie, she's driving with purpose. The toy car getting Miles Dyson to move so that Sarah doesn't kill him is the only Deus Ex Machina in the movie. Sarah is willing to shoot Miles Dyson, when he's just a silhouette in her scope, but when she has to walk up with a pistol and his family's right there, it's too real. She can't do it. Her compassionate side can't do it, even though right at this moment, someone is walking up to someone and killing them with a weapon. Her compassionate side has been completely repressed for years, but here it does come to the surface. And he also says no one had ever heard of Edward Furlong before. This was $100 million, hundreds million dollar movie when no one had heard of something that expensive. And the movie lives or dies on the relationship between John and Sarah and the Terminator. We talked about how to convince someone that they're a robot from the future, and someone walking into my home, cutting the skin off their arm, that would prove that to me, or at least it would prove their commitment. Miles catches himself getting excited about the chip. Maybe if it was 4 billion instead of 5, then I'd be okay with it. And when Arnold says, "I'll be back," James asks, "What do you think? Is that better than 'she'll be back'?" Just pulling the group. You know what, James? It is definitely better than 'she'll be back.' I would never in a million years claim that Terminator 3 or 4 are better movies than Terminator 2. However, in the first movie, when Arnold says, "I'll be back," it's followed up by a brutal killing spree. I could understand if some people felt that the scene simply pushes it too far, considering the history of mass shootings in the US. It's not... I'd like to think that making similar scene today, they would pause and stop to wonder if this was really the way to go. Today we're more focused on the mass shootings. We hear from more of the survivors of them. He shoots 30 cops within a matter of minutes, men with families. It cements that Sarah and Kyle have to face the Terminator alone. They cannot depend on the authorities. In the first movie, the line "I'll be back" is prelude to slaughter. And here in the second movie, it's followed by a cool rescue mission. And you didn't have to have him say that. You could have just come up with something that's different. They didn't reuse "you're terminated, fucker." Instead they have the hasta la vista baby and "is it gone? Terminated." And James Cameron says, "In England we had to take out the shots of the SWAT and police being kneecapped because they have a real problem with the IRA, and the IRA loves kneecapping, so they don't enjoy seeing that in movies. When Sarah first shoots the T-1000 in the head, she shouldn't have stopped to look. She should have kept shooting. That's what a warrior would do, and that's why she botches the next shot. But she's in shock, so you can forgive her. The shot of Arnold being smashed in between steel was a dummy. And Bill Wisher said, I wasn't getting paid enough, and James Cameron said, I was getting paid enough, but he's a friend of mine and I didn't want to send him back in a broken condition. And you see the red eye go out. That's what told you he was dead and that it was over in the first one, so that grammar is used again. And Sarah runs out of shells shooting the T-1000, and Cameron says, I've always said of this woman, she's incredibly brave, but she can't count. Excuse me. And Bill Wisher said, how do you show T-1000 die? Because we've seen it shattered. And James Cameron said, how do you show it in agony? First, you can see its brain malfunction. It keeps going through different disguises that might solve the problem, but none of them do. And finally, it vomits its brain out its mouth. Yeah. My ex-fiance has said that she thought that was a bit much, it being so grotesque, but I mean, when I first watched this movie, I hadn't played any Silent Hill, but I mean, if we're talking grotesque stuff that is, that's upsetting, then yeah, for sure, some Silent Hill stuff. But I didn't think, I never really cared. It never. It looks cool and the effects are good, but it's not. It's not scary to me when it melts. Now, excuse me. The Cracked People commentary, which is times of the theatrical cut, not special edition or director's cut. Why do they keep on, like, on the DVD it's referred to as the I have a DVD that has the special edition cut, but it's called the director's cut. I haven't heard it referred to by that anywhere else. And then this one simply calls it the extended special edition. It's just, make up your minds, people, so we can know which ones we're talking about. Anyway, but yeah, the cracked commentary is still up. It's incredibly funny. They point out a lot of the dumb things, but they do also say positive things about it. And I would like to point out that their commentary went online years after I recorded my old vlog, since we go into a number of the same things, and I'd like to think I wouldn't just be saying all those same things if I had heard them in theirs. But I think theirs was like 2015, mine was like 2010 or something. And they even talk about Genesis. I'm not entirely sure they call it Genesis, but they say the new one. So yeah, 2015. I guess otherwise it would maybe have had to be the fourth one if they recorded it way back then, but I'm almost certain it was it's 2015 or something. Anyway, one thing they point out is that the T-1000 wastes an incredible amount of time, and I would argue that in the first Terminator movie, the Terminator wastes no time. Like, if there's a while passing between him leaving one place and getting to another, it's because he didn't have a car or to like all the way. But the T-1000 gets a cop car, right after killing the cop and simulating his clothes. So why did it wait until the morning? And if it had showed up really early, John, might have been able to get to John before he left. It's just, yeah. And one other points out in the movie has the same story structure as Aliens. And I didn't note exactly what they said, so this is from memory. Build up first encounter, preparing for the second encounter, and then the second encounter. Now, that brings us... Well, now that was a long segment. Okay, so... brings us to... T-1000. So, I love the gradual reveal of what he can do, the gradual build-up to him using the stabby weapons more effectively. I'll be honest, talking about the T-1000 is part of why I do the video, because otherwise I did say a lot of the things that I wanted to in the old. Yeah. So, obviously him being able to imitate any person that he touches makes him an even better infiltrator, as well as being able to simply make himself look like the floor and wait for someone to walk all over him. I don't know if James Cameron meant for the T-1000 to comment on how we civilians are willing to blindly help someone who appears to be a cop. Again, he says so in some of the special features, but that might be rationalizing or, saying, oh yeah, I totally thought of that. It certainly is a very smart approach. Neither the T-800 nor Kyle Reese attempt this strategy. Excuse me. And really, it wouldn't have made... Excuse me. If Kyle... Excuse me. If he had grabbed a cop's uniform instead of, you know, a, what's it called, a coat, then every single time that he is seen by someone, they are gonna react as if they're seeing a cop. So another cop is going to assume that Reese is on their side and then freak out when he isn't. And civilians are gonna be like, why is that cop behaving so weirdly? But by being a civilian, you know, all he has to do is, you know, the moment that someone seeing him doesn't know that he's a wanted man, you know, they don't think twice about him because he doesn't look that bad. And the, let's see, yeah, just in general. Anyway, the T-1000 does not drop the facade of appearing human until it knows exactly where John Connor is and is very close to getting him. Let's talk about the shape objects it imitates. Sharp objects it imitates. The first time it stabs anyone is right after going through time travel, which means that the first time you see it, you think either he found a sharp object after arriving and before the cops showed up. And we do see that the fence is still glowing red hot, so it must have been recently. Or maybe he had a shank of nature's pocket. It starts, or, you know, the old prison wall, if you know what I mean. It starts out incredibly subtle and only gradually builds. I can't believe that I went for the Futurama reference instead of the Deadpool 2 reference, because I just rewatched Deadpool 2. Anyway, I probably made at least one Deadpool 2 reference fairly recently in another video. Maybe I felt like mentally I felt like, yep, that's good enough. Anyway, it starts out incredibly subtle and gradually builds. Some directors would have had him produce a large blade in this first scene, but it's not necessary for his purposes. Let me think briefly. I don't know if it's a great example, but there's this thing in the Spawn movie where, like, someone who helps guide Spawn shows up and Spawn doesn't really listen to him. And I think it's after Spawn walks away, the guy materializes a big sharp blade and then he just puts it away again. Now, that's obviously supposed to communicate to the audience, this guy has something like that. But imagine if this movie did that. Imagine if he produces a large blade, kills the cop, and then pulls it away. They could very easily have done that. Some movies would have. And I don't know, I'm not sure if it's a bad idea for the Spawn movie. It's been a long time since I watched it. I remember it as being very bad. And I remember it as my being able to identify that it wasn't very Spawny, even though I hadn't read very much Spawn, and I haven't read any since watching it. I think there's some really great stuff in Spawn. I think there was this one, I guess that might be a spoiler now, but I read a little bit of Spawn, a little bit of Witchblade, and then I settled on Spider-Man and other Marvel, you know, X-Men and Avengers. A little bit of Fantastic Four. Anyway, yeah, comparatively, when he stabs John's foster father, that was the most direct way to attack him without having to leave the telephone. You know, there it wouldn't have been enough to produce a much smaller blade. So, and, you know, since the foster father was interfering with his attempts at getting John to say when he'll come home, or convincing him to come home immediately, maybe saying where isn't that, you know, Wolfie's fine, honey, Wolfie's just fine, where are you? That's the last thing she says, if I recall. You know, yeah, if John had told her, then the T-1000 would have immediately left. So it's very, yeah. And when he stabs the guard who won something or other on the coffee cup thing, it was the quickest way to get rid of him. And I also read, it seems like he can't say anything, and that makes sense because the left front part of the brain is the part that controls speech, and that's exactly where he gets stabbed. And it makes sense that the T-1000 would think to do that, because that is, exactly what he's trying to avoid. The large knife that he used on John's foster father would have been excessive in that situation. I also love the detail that when the T-1000 realizes that other police are approaching, it knows the most effective way for it to attack is to temporarily hide. Because if those cops talk directly to him, they're going to say details or ask for details in a way that he cannot respond to because he is not familiar enough with police procedure from that time. But the guard that he stabs will easily be allowed back in there. And again, like I said earlier, sooner or later, someone is going to walk out, and he's hoping for sooner rather than later. And he also doesn't know that the T-800 and John are coming, so he might think he has much more time. Someone will walk onto him and he'll be able to sample. Let's see. If you tried to simply walk back later after the other cops had left, there would be questions about why he was alone. He didn't realize there would be cops there at all, or he would probably have had some other plan. When he's approaching the elevator, he doesn't try to stab. He doesn't just try to stab, but he starts out by trying to open the doors with the, I don't know what you would call them, but yeah. And he also stabs down through the elevator ceiling while hard to hit as he's standing up there, making for an interesting attack. And he latches onto the car and starts to get closer. Near the end, after some vehicle crashing, he stabs the one guy swiftly. He knows where his target is, and no one's nearby. If he had killed the hospital guard swiftly, that guy might have yelled in pain, and T-1000 would have had trouble getting past the nearby workers. There's think of like the early in Demon Knight, where Billy Zane is just he's explaining, yes, I was in that car, the car that blew up, that you were in that, and how are you still okay? And he's like, airbags, gotta love them, and he keeps having to fight because he needs their help, so he can't just say, oh, shut up, I have a job to do here, and you're slowing me down here. And the torture makes sense, except that he could just imitate her, but being shattered apparently ruined the imitating being perfect. And originally John realizes it's T-1000, not his mother, by seeing T-1000's foot combining with the grating. Yeah, 1 second. So yeah, what I'm saying is, when he says call to Jen now, maybe he's worried that if he tries imitating her voice, it'll like break mid-sentence and John will realize it's not really her, which isn't going to happen if it's the real Sarah who does it. And let's see. Yeah. It is too bad that after they escape the mental hospital, he does not show up again at all until they've already exited Miles Bennett Dyson's house. He sees they've already left, and they burnt whatever data he had at his house. I forget if that scene's even in the theatrical cut, or we only see him when he arrives at Cyberdyne in the theatrical. And there's supposed to be a scene that might not even have been filmed, I forget, but where he goes to Enrique and, he does the I know this hurts torture of Enrique for info, but he doesn't get any, and the Enrique blows up the T-1000 with a grenade, but he simply reforms in a way similar to at the end after being frozen and shot to pieces. I think part of the reason it was cut, possibly even before it was shot or effects were attempted, was that the scene was just too similar to when the T-1000 is John's foster parents and to when the T-1000 is frozen and shattered, but at least it would have been something. And then next in that scene, he does get info from the baby's mother by threatening to hurt the baby, explaining why he goes to Dyson's place and why he didn't do so sooner. I do feel like James Cameron made a mistake in letting the movie play for so long with literally the titular character not being on screen. A huge part of the whole point of a Terminator movie, like, you know, these first three and also Genesis, is that we're terrified. I don't know, maybe only really the first one, I guess, but it seems to me like we should be in the sequels as well. Terrified that the Terminator will kill its target. For a long time, I think 40 minutes, I think that James Cameron says that on a commentary track or something. The T-1000 isn't even on screen, nor does it do something off screen that we're told of or shown. In the first movie, the T-800 never disappears for a long time. And even when like minutes pass without him on screen, his presence is always felt. I mean, ultimately, I didn't make a note of exactly how long the longest amount of time passing in the first movie without us seeing the Terminator, but yeah, he's never gone from the movie for very long, even if maybe, you know, it seems like it's going to be a while. He has to deal with some, maybe he has to repair himself, maybe he has to go to Sarah's mother's cabin and then back, you know, but it never feels like he's just gone. But yeah, the T-1000, again, I quoted James Cameron a little earlier, and I think commentary track, he says himself, they would have been fine if Sarah hadn't gone back for Dyson, which is an incredibly frustrating, yeah. Let's see. Maybe an argument could be made that the T-1000 doesn't use the ability to make knives and such very much in the climax, and certainly, let's see. What? I don't know what that means. I voice typed someone strong enough to beat up Arnold Schwarzenegger. Maybe I meant that he doesn't look like someone strong enough. I don't know. The climax of the first one features the T-800 reduced to a metal skeleton, which is never far behind the two leads, and survives being blown up after it already survived a truck blowing up around it, and all of its flesh burning off. Bears repeating, people. Bears repeating. Maybe the equivalent in this movie is supposed to be the grotesque nature of the T-1000 in the molten lead. While that is creepy and maybe disturbing, I wouldn't call it scary. Yeah, the grotesque creatures in the Silent Hill games, those are scary. And I'd add the warped kind of places where you'll go through a door and suddenly you're in a completely, in a place that isn't at all reminiscent of this other, So it's not that I don't consider grotesque visuals scary. And by the time it happens, the T-1000 is clearly no longer a threat. See, again, that's the thing. These two movie climaxes play so differently. Sometimes it really feels like James Cameron did not mean for these two movies to be set in the same franchise. The first one, I mean, it's essentially a slasher movie ending, The slasher killer is slowly but surely moving towards the, final girl. And, someone protecting her gets killed by him. And just when you think, it's like a Jason movie, okay, he's got to be dead now. We've hanged him, or we stabbed him, we electrocuted him, whatever. And then he gets back up. I can understand people who say you should never be able to make such a direct comparison to a Jason movie and a Terminator movie. I completely understand that, and I respectfully disagree, because the Jason movies, like it or not all the time, but at least when they really work, some of the time they're actually scary, and this movie isn't. And I just don't think that a movie should be titled after a killer, someone who, literally a machine built to kill, and then have so little, have it not be scary, and have so, I mean, you don't have to kill them on screen, but this doesn't even have very much implied death. This one retcons that, 17 cops died and 13 were wounded in the first one, in the police station. In the first one, in the police station, we don't see any sign that anybody survived. Nobody left that police station alive after the Terminator, after he says, "I'll be back," and then drives the car in. Nobody leaves it alive other than the Terminator, Sarah, and Kyle. So, it's as far as we can tell. Anyway. Yeah, so, the first one, it's a horror movie climax. It is. It's the final girl being chased by the slasher villain. And in this movie, it's more this thing of, like, each time you see, when you see the, let's see, first you have the frozen T-1000, the T-800 shoots it, and then he turns around, turns his head and says, "Go now." And then he turns back, and the T-1000's gone. Which is like, you could have just been watching. You could have told them to go before you shot it. I really hate when smart characters do stupid things to prolong a movie. Anyway, not very long after he appears, and I'll grant that it's similar to a horror movie, the way that he suddenly just appears, and it's not unrealistic either. He shows up and starts, the two Terminators fight, and then after that, when you see Sarah, by herself, you can't be 100% certain if it's the T-1000 posing as Sarah or the real Sarah. So that's a good, and, paranoia. It's again, that's something you get when you have killer robots that look exactly like human beings, and you should do that. Anyway. So, back to my notes. I do enjoy the scene of Sarah firing the shotgun and the T-1000 and running out of ammo, but the T-800 having perfect timing is annoyingly convenient. It doesn't feel like the T-800 is a strategic mastermind or even just good at shooting, as much as it feels like a relief that the movie lets the good guys make it. And yeah, I can't, how, I'm not asking you to hate the movie, but you can't possibly tell me that you don't think that's ridiculous, that he just suddenly is there at the exact right time. It's just, it's one of the most convenient things I've seen in any movie ever. I get how he got the he got the thing back. He got the grenade launcher back, and he used the one arm which was holding the grenade launcher to drag himself onto a conveyor belt. How could he possibly be sure that that would be the right conveyor belt? And it is like, if just a few seconds later, and it's completely useless for him to show up, the T-1000 would have gone up to Sarah and, stabbed her before the T-800 was in a position to fire. It's just, and if he had shown up a couple seconds earlier, the T-1000 wouldn't have been sufficiently stunned. Yeah, just, no, I can't. I do appreciate that the movie proves early on that the T-1000 is not vulnerable to the truck exploding around it as the T-800 was, at least as far as still being effective at convincing people that it's human. And that's, I already mentioned the thing with serious trouble. They go into that somewhat in the show, but yeah, I'm gonna get to the third nemesis. In the first one, the Terminator can be slowed down, even temporarily overwhelmed. You can force it into a position where it needs to repair itself. You know, the trigger finger is destroyed. Sorry, the trigger finger is temporarily broken. The function is temporarily broken after the shootout that culminates. The car chase and shootout that culminates in all the cops showing up, and the T-800, escaping from the car, and then it appears again at the police station. Clearly, you see when it's repairing itself, you clearly see it was completely, it has to fix its trigger finger, even though it is, and the eye was probably blocking its vision, hypothetically, let's say that scene ended without the cops showing up, with the Terminator just running away. Kyle and Sarah would have gotten a head start. And I don't find it frustrating that, because the scene at the police station accomplishes things. It's not Genesis which make up for it, unlike the third. It feels somewhat pointless when they shoot the Terminator. And again, this and Genesis do make up for it. The third one, I wouldn't really say. When you watch the third one, personally, I find that it's just not. Yeah, it feels like why are they even bothering? And that movie also has the problem of the Terminator being really dumb and not using incredibly effective weapons really early on and stuff. So anyway, let's see. There's the. But yeah, I do think that's. I get that it makes the T-1000 seem unstoppable, but the T-800 seemed unstoppable, and there was still a way to hurt it, And the T-1000, I mean, it seems like it's slowed down more by being shot with small arms fire than the T-800 is. So it doesn't seem, in that way, it's almost a step back. It just, yeah. Now, that takes us to the next section. IMDb, Wikipedia, and critics' sites. And I'm going to be jumping around unusually because there we go. So I finally got around to just making sure I have a shortcut I can skip between. So I've got, 4 shortcuts it looks like. I don't want to talk about because I've been talking for 3 hours and I'm not going to go over a ton of reviews. Again, the reviews, they're online. You don't have to, Now, from IMDb trivia, Michael Biehn was the first choice for the role of the T-1000 in a complete reversal of roles with Arnold Schwarzenegger, who is now a hero. However, this idea was abandoned as it was just too confusing for viewers. And again, if you hadn't watched the first one, you might be confused about or even if you have, I guess. Yeah, I'm just digging myself into a hole here. This is what I had noted for it. I love Robert Patrick. I do. And I love his version of the T-1000. I absolutely do. I do love Michael Biehn more, so I'm not completely objective on this, but I do think this would have been a really cool way to do the movie. I think Michael Biehn plays villains quite well, and seeing Sarah have to shoot a Michael Biehn looking Terminator who looks like the love of her life, her protector, and instead of protecting her and John, someone with his face is now trying to kill them. That could have been truly amazing. But again, Robert Patrick does an amazing job. Schwarzenegger set a very high standard for how compelling a Terminator needs to be, and I do think Robert Patrick lives up to that standard, obviously, in a different way. And from what I remember, the show tended to have, actors who would live up to the high standard as well. Let me think. It's been too long since I watched the third one for me to say, but I'll try to speak to it in the video I do on the third one in, I think, a month and a half or something, I forget. So, the scene where Sarah comes face to face with the T-800 in the hospital is already compelling. She, of course, thinks it's another evil Terminator. But when she runs away from him, she then spots what appears to be calories coming from the other end of the hallway, and he throws, a gun and starts shooting towards her. The range of emotions, she would feel would be very interesting. Now, Denzel Washington turned down the role of Miles Bennett Dyson. No offense to Jim Cameron, but when I read the script, I thought, all he does is look scared and sweat. I had to pass. Yeah, I'm not sure why Joe Morton thought it was such amazing representation, but I guess he's just so used to no representation, so even that, I'm sorry. I like Morton's performance. I don't mean disrespect on him, but yeah, the role is beneath Denzel Washington's standards. I really think he's such an incredible actor. You really, if you're not going to give him good material, then don't even bother. I know he's been in bad movies, but I'm just gonna stop there. Now, in the teaser trailer, we see the T-800 put into a machine called the Bioflesh Regenerator at the Endoskeleton Factory, which grows and generates living human tissue onto the T-800, giving him his human form and emergence as Schwarzenegger. Kenner released a Bioflesh Regenerator's playset, which came with T-800 Terminator action figures. With the T-800 Terminator endoskeleton is put into the clear plastic mold of Arnold Schwarzenegger, a flesh-colored substance similar to Play-Doh was injected into the mold around the endoskeleton, creating a flesh body that could be peeled off in places to reveal the endoskeleton beneath, mimicking the damages seen in the movie. I want one. Man, that sounds so much fun. Holy crap. Now, in 1989, when Orion still retained the rights to the original, it was briefly reported that James Cameron would only write and produce, with John McTiernan directing. No thank you. I love his work too, but he is not right for this franchise. I think he did amazing work on movies like The Predator, Die Hard 1 and 3. Let me think. I don't remember the last action hero, that's what it's called, right? But I know I liked it before, so it's possible I still would, but I'm not gonna go on a limb here. I don't know if I would still call it. Now, let's see. Right. The scene where the Terminator reboots after being shut down by the T-1000 was not in the script, and was only added during editing because director James Cameron felt that the audience would not be able to understand how the Terminator returns to deliver the final blow against the T-1000. How could they possibly think that that would work without it? I really, you were going to show him shut down, and then you were going to show him just show up again without. I'm sorry, I really don't. You know what? Maybe it was stress. Maybe James Cameron was so stressed making this movie, which I have a huge amount of sympathy for. So his brain just melted for certain parts of the filmmaking process, and so he thought that the future Coda would be well received. He thought that seeing the T-800 stopped but not rebooted would work with seeing it come back and destroy. Holy crap. It even says the scene where the Terminator pulls the impaled metal rod off was shot on Christmas Day itself because it was during a Christmas scene. Yeah, and Schwarzenegger was friends with Bruce Willis. I mean, the movies aren't that different. Why haven't they been in the same movie until The Expendables? Anyway. How could he possibly think that? Yeah. There's so many things that are. Anyway. So I guess that's what I've noted to make sure to say, and it's been over 3 hours. It's not that it's too terribly late in the day, but you know what, I'm just gonna real quick do a skim. Let me think. Let me think. What was the... Let's see. Oh, okay. Yeah, maybe this won't be too... And maybe it will. Huh. What if I put in... Let's see. I guess there's some chance that it's this. Okay, here we go. So where did I put? Ah, brilliant. I did actually put it at the very bottom. So I didn't have to do a word search. Anyway. So this is my old written review. I'm not gonna read every word. I'm just gonna see what I feel like I wanna say. So let's see. Yeah, I point out the movie isn't just, you know, a sequel made to cash in on an earlier success. You know, James Cameron had new things he wanted to do, and everyone brought their A game. You know, it's not, and it doesn't have a bunch of studio interference, as far as I know, that just ruins the movie, which is the case with a lot of big sequels. So let's see. Yeah, right. The action gets bigger and still consists of fights, shootouts, and car chases, all of which are marvelous and exciting and never degenerates into stupidity, which, you know, I wrote this review after watching the third one. So, yeah. You know, the otherwise you might not think it's absolutely necessary, but yeah, the third one, the action becomes stupid. Let's see. And yeah, I guess I'm gonna limit it to that. And yeah. Okay, so yeah, 3 hours and just under 17 minutes by now. I am very happy to have finally. I've wanted to do this for many years, and just kept, figuring, well, there are other things that maybe you should do first. But then, I saw Terminator 6 is coming out this year, supposedly, in what, half a year by now, I guess. And I was like, if I really make sure to, I could accomplish, I could make sure to have done more videos on all 5 films leading, the first 5 films. Secondly, it ignores all but the first and the second, I think. The 6th does. Anyway, the first 5 Terminator films made, and the TV show. So, yeah, I'm really glad to be doing, and when I watch it, I want to have recently watched the first 5. So, it's been a lot of years since I last watched movies 3 or 4. So yeah, that is all that I'm really glad to finally have this. Okay, so I hope you enjoyed watching, as I enjoyed watching, and especially enjoyed recording, and I will catch you next time.